In the glittering but perilous court of Queen Elizabeth I, young lady-in-waiting Anne Marwood hides a deadly secret, a dagger meant for the Queen herself. Torn between duty, deception, and forbidden love, Anne must navigate a maze of betrayal, spies, and shifting alliances. As plots thicken and loyalties blur, she must decide whether to become the blade that ends a reign or the hand that saves it. The Dagger of Queens, where power cuts deeper than steel.
The heavy oak doors of Whitehall Palace swung open before Anne Marwood, and a rush of cold, stone-scented air washed over her. Her heart fluttered like a captive bird, caught between excitement and dread. She stepped inside, her delicate slippers muffling the echo on the polished flagstones, eyes wide with the solemn grandeur of the Tudor court. The air was thick with the mingled scents of burning tallow, lavender, and aged wood, a perfume both ancient and alive with whispered history. Anna's dark hair was neatly tied back, strands carefully pinned to frame her composed, pale face. Yet beneath the calm exterior, a tempest brewed beneath her skirts, concealed by layers of fine silk and embroidered hems, lay the dagger. Its cold steel blade was hidden from view, but its weight pressed heavy against her, a constant reminder of the peril she bore. The court was a tapestry of color and sound. Ladies in gowns of deep crimson and emerald green fluttered about like exotic birds, their laughter sharp as the clink of jewelry. Gentlemen in doublets of velvet and brocade whispered in shadowed alcoves, eyes darting with suspicion and ambition. Anne sensed the undercurrents swirling beneath the polished veneer, the subtle rivalries, the veiled threats, the games played with smiles as sharp as any blade. Her first steps took her to the Queen's private chambers, where the air seemed charged with a different energy altogether. There, seated upon her throne-like chair, was Queen Elizabeth I herself. The monarch's fiery red hair shimmered like a halo in the dim candlelight, and her gaze was as piercing as the blade Anne carried. Elizabeth's eyes met Anne's with the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. In that moment, Anne felt both the Queen's formidable presence and the crushing responsibility that came with serving her. A silent vow took root in Anne's heart to protect this woman, no matter the cost. Later, in a shadowed corridor lined with tapestries depicting battles and triumphs, Anne met Lady Margaret Seymour. The older courtier's silver-streaked hair caught the flickering candlelight, and her piercing eyes seemed to see straight through the young woman. "The court is a beast with many heads," Lady Margaret whispered, her voice low and sharp. "Trust is a currency more precious than gold, and far more dangerous to gamble. Guard your secrets well, Anne." Anne nodded, tightening her grip on the dagger hidden beneath her skirts. The words echoed in her mind, a caution that settled uneasily over her. As the afternoon waned, the courtyard outside buzzed with activity. Servants hurried past, their voices mingling with the clatter of horses and the soft murmur of conversation. It was in this throng that Anne first felt the shadow of Lord Edmund Grey. Tall and imposing, with cold grey eyes that seemed to cut through the crowd, he moved with the assurance of a man who believed himself destined for power. Anne watched him carefully, sensing the danger he represented not just to the Queen, but to the fragile order of the court itself. The dagger, once a mere secret burden, now felt like the fulcrum on which the fate of the realm might turn. That night, as Anne lay in her austere chamber, the flicker of candlelight casting long shadows on the walls, she contemplated the path ahead. The dagger was hidden, but the threat it symbolized was ever present. Within these walls, beneath the grandeur and ceremony, a deadly game was unfolding, and Anne Marwood was caught in its midst. Her youthful inexperience warred with a fierce determination. To serve the Queen was to serve the realm. To protect the realm was to face the impossible. The dagger was a silent promise, a secret that could topple kings or save them. As the palace settled into uneasy quiet, Anne's thoughts raced. Whom could she trust? What dangers lurked behind every curtsy and smile? The court was a labyrinth of intrigue, and every step she took might lead her closer to peril or to power. The night deepened, and the distant hoot of an owl echoed through the gardens. Anne closed her eyes, steeling herself for the days to come. The dagger lay hidden, but the blade of fate was already drawn. The Tudor court was a labyrinth of polished smiles and whispered secrets, a place where every glance could conceal a dagger and every word mask a threat. Anne Marwood had arrived only recently, yet already the weight of the court's gaze settled upon her like a heavy cloak. She moved with deliberate grace, her dark hair pulled back tightly to reveal a face that betrayed little of the turmoil within. But beneath the calm exterior, her heart beat a frantic rhythm, each pulse a reminder of the deadly secret she carried hidden beneath her gown. The dagger meant for Queen Elizabeth herself. The great gallery where Anne now lingered was alive with the soft murmur of voices and the gentle clinking of goblets. Tapestries hung thick on ancient stone walls, their rich colors muted in the flickering candlelight. Shadows danced and merged as courtiers passed, their conversations a delicate web of alliances, rivalries, and barely concealed ambitions. Anne observed them all with keen eyes, the raised brow of a noblewoman as she regarded a rival, the quick, darting glance exchanged between two men in dark doublets. Each gesture, each subtle inflection, was a piece of the intricate puzzle she was only beginning to understand. It was here, in the midst of this elegant danger, that Anne first met Lady Margaret Seymour. The older woman approached with a measured step, silver-streaked hair framing a face lined with years of courtly experience. Her piercing eyes held a sharpness that could cut through pretense, yet there was a gentleness in her tone when she spoke to Anne. "You watch well, Lady Marwood," Lady Margaret said quietly, her voice just above a whisper. "The court is no place for the faint of heart. Every smile you see is a mask, and every friendship a gamble." Anne nodded, swallowing the lump rising in her throat. "I am learning, my lady. But the more I see, the more I fear I do not know enough." Lady Margaret's eyes softened slightly. "None of us ever do. But you have a steadiness about you that will serve you well. Remember, discretion is your greatest ally. Speak little, observe much, and trust cautiously." The advice was simple yet profound, and Anne felt a flicker of hope. Here was someone who might help her bear the unbearable weight of her secret. Still, the dagger she concealed pressed cold against her ribs, a constant, chilling reminder of the peril that shadowed every step. As days passed, Anne's senses sharpened. At courtly banquets, beneath the gilded chandeliers and amid the scent of spiced wine and burning tallow, she witnessed the subtle barbs exchanged beneath polite laughter. Lady Cecily Howard's sharp tongue and calculating eyes marked her as a dangerous adversary, while whispers of foreign emissaries and secret meetings hinted at larger forces at play. Anne's friendship with Lady Margaret deepened, the older woman guiding her through the treacheries of Tudor politics with a steady hand. Together, they navigated the delicate dance of favors and warnings, of alliances forged in shadows. Yet Anne's vigilance never wavered. Each night, in the solitude of her chamber, she would touch the hidden dagger beneath her gown, feeling the cold steel steady her trembling resolve. "This court," Lady Margaret once said, "is a crown of thorns. To wear it is to bleed unseen." Anne understood that more keenly than ever. Her loyalty to the Queen was fierce, but the path ahead was fraught with danger. She would need all her cunning and courage if she was to survive the whispers in the halls and protect the Queen from the blade that threatened to change history. As the candle flames guttered low and the court settled into uneasy silence, Anne's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock at her door. A messenger, breathless and wide-eyed, handed her a folded note, a warning cloaked in careful script. The game had begun in earnest, and Anne Marwood, with the dagger hidden close, was at its center. With a determined breath, she read the words that would shape the days to come, the shadows of intrigue lengthening around her like a gathering storm. The heavy wooden doors of the great hall swung open with a measured creak as Anne Marwood stepped into the courtyard, bathed in the waning light of the afternoon sun. Her heart fluttered with a mixture of resolve and trepidation. Here, within the stone walls of Elizabeth's court, every glance bore the weight of unspoken intentions, and every whispered word could become a weapon. Yet, Anne's purpose was clear: to find an ally who could help her guard the secret. She bore the dagger hidden beneath her gown, a silent sentinel against the storm gathering within the court. She moved quietly, her dark hair tied back tightly, eyes scanning the figures that dotted the courtyard. The distant clang of swords being sharpened mingled with the rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. Then, near the marble fountain at the centre, she spotted him, Sir Thomas Wycliffe. Broad-shouldered and clad in the polished armour of the Queen's Guard, he seemed a steadfast island amid the shifting tides of courtly intrigue. His rough hands rested casually on the hilt of his sword, and his serious gaze swept the courtyard with a vigilance born of duty. Anne's footsteps faltered as she approached, the weight of her secret dagger a constant reminder of the danger lurking just beneath the surface. "Sir Thomas," she began, voice barely above a whisper, "may I have a moment?" He turned, surprise flickering in his eyes before settling into a guarded curiosity. "Lady Anne, of course. What troubles you in these uncertain times?" Their conversation was cautious, each word weighed carefully. Anne spoke of her unwavering loyalty to the Queen, hinting at the threats she sensed but dared not name. Sir Thomas listened intently, his expression hardening with resolve. "The court is a labyrinth of shadows," he said quietly, "but loyalty like yours is a beacon. If there is danger, we must face it together." A fragile trust began to take root, an alliance forged in the shared understanding of peril and purpose. Yet even as they spoke, the shadow of another presence loomed: Lord Edmund Grey. From a darkened gallery overlooking the courtyard, his cold grey eyes watched the exchange with a calculating gaze. His voice, low and measured, carried through to Anne's ears as he spoke to a select group of nobles. "Power is not given, it is taken," he murmured, each word a sharpened blade aimed at the heart of the realm. The flicker of candlelight cast eerie shadows across his angular face, embodying the threat that hung over the court like a gathering storm. Anne felt a chill, the weight of the dagger beneath her sleeve suddenly much heavier. Later, as evening draped its velvet cloak over the court, Anne found herself once again beside the marble fountain. The scent of jasmine drifted on the cool air, mingling with the soft murmur of distant voices. Sir Thomas's presence was a steady comfort in a world where trust was scarce. "You carry a great burden, Lady Anne," he said softly, "but you do not have to bear it alone." She met his gaze, the cautious hope in her heart flickering brighter. "Together," she whispered, "we can protect her." Yet the night was never truly still. As she retreated to her chambers, the chapel bell tolled in solemn cadence, each peal echoing the fragility of the peace they sought to defend. Fingers trembling slightly, Anne brushed the hidden dagger beneath her sleeve. It was more than steel, it was a symbol of sacrifice, courage, and the perilous balance of power that defined the Tudor court. And as the shadows lengthened, Anne knew that the fateful encounter with Sir Thomas had set in motion a chain of events that would test every ounce of her resolve. The Queen's safety, the realm's survival, and Anne's very life now hung in delicate balance, poised on the edge of a blade. The court whispered its secrets, and Anne listened, ready to act, but the question remained: whom could she truly trust? The corridors of Whitehall were no strangers to whispers, but tonight they seemed to carry a more dangerous weight. Anne Marwood moved with deliberate caution, her footsteps muffled against the cold flagstones as she approached the shadowed alcove near the east wing. The flickering torchlight cast long, wavering shadows, and the distant murmur of voices pulled her closer, the words muffled yet urgent. She pressed herself against the rough stone, breath shallow, ears straining to catch fragments of the conversation within. The Queen's grip weakens with every trusted friend turned adversary, a low voice murmured, thick with venom. "Grey's hour approaches, soon the crown will fall where it belongs." Anna's heart quickened. The name Grey was spoken with reverence and fear, a chilling reminder of the man whose ambition threatened to unravel the very fabric of the realm. Lord Edmund Grey, once a trusted advisor, now a shadow stalking the corridors of power with a hidden blade. Retreating silently, Anne's mind raced. The dagger she guarded was not merely a weapon, but a symbol of the deadly stakes. It was meant for the Queen, a token of the treachery festering beneath the polished veneer of court life. Every whispered plot, every secret meeting, tightened the noose around Elizabeth's reign. Seeking counsel, Anne found Lady Margaret Seymour in the Queen's private chambers, the older woman's silver-streaked hair gleaming softly in the candlelight. Margaret's eyes, sharp and unyielding, met Anne's with an intensity born from years navigating the treacherous tides of Tudor politics. "You tread a perilous path, child," Margaret said quietly. "Lord Grey's web spreads wider than you know. Foreign powers send their shadows, each eager to grasp the crown through the chaos he stirs. Trust is scarce, and betrayal waits in every corner." Anne nodded, the weight of her secret dagger heavier than ever. "I will not let the Queen fall," she vowed, voice steady despite the fear curling in her chest. Outside, Sir Thomas Wycliffe hunned his blade beneath a slate-grey sky, the rhythmic clang of steel ringing through the courtyard. His broad shoulders tensed with each precise strike, a physical manifestation of the resolve burning within. Anne watched from a distance, comforted by the knowledge that his loyalty was a shield against the encroaching darkness. As the great hall filled with the glittering elite for a sumptuous banquet, Anne sensed the undercurrents swirling beneath the polite smiles and clinking goblets. Foreign ambassadors exchanged veiled threats, noble factions jockeyed for advantage, and the dagger's shadow loomed unseen but palpable. The delicate dance of diplomacy masked the deadly game poised to erupt. Amidst the revelry, Anne's thoughts remained focused. The dagger was more than a blade. It was a fulcrum upon which the fate of the realm balanced. Each secret uncovered deepened the peril, yet steeled her courage. In the shadows of ambition, she would stand vigilant, a silent guardian against the blade destined to change history. The night closed around Whitehall like a tightening shroud. Anne knew the path ahead would demand every ounce of her cunning and bravery. The court was a battlefield where loyalty and betrayal wore the same mask, and she, a young lady in waiting, was caught at the heart of a deadly storm. Yet in her hands lay the fragile hope of a crown's survival, a hope she would protect at all costs. And as the candles guttered low, Anne's resolve burned brighter than ever, a beacon against the encroaching dark. The heavy oaken doors of the Queen's private swung open with a muted creak, admitting Anne Marwood into a sanctum few ladies in waiting ever glimpsed. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and lavender, mingling with the faint musk of aged tapestries that adorned the walls. Candles flickered in ornate sconces, casting dancing shadows across the richly embroidered hangings and the gilded frame of a portrait of Elizabeth's father, Henry V. At the heart of the room stood the Queen herself, a figure of regal command and serene authority. Her fiery red hair was swept high and adorned with pearls and jewels that caught the candlelight like captured stars, and her sharp eyes, the color of burnished topaz, seemed to pierce through any pretense. Anne's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped forward with careful grace, the weight of the dagger hidden beneath her bodice a silent companion to her every breath. She knelt, head bowed, feeling the coolness of the marble floor seep through the thin soles of her shoes. Elizabeth's voice, low and measured, broke the silence. "Anne Marwood," she said, "you have served well in your brief time here. Your loyalty is noted, and in these dangerous days, such loyalty is the crown's finest jewel." Anne dared to lift her eyes, catching a glimmer of something softer beneath the Queen's steely gaze, a moment of trust, a spark of recognition. It was a gift and a burden, binding her ever closer to the perilous fate of the realm. As the audience ended, Anne was escorted back through the corridors to the company of Lady Margaret Seymour, whose silver-streaked hair and piercing eyes bespoke decades of service and survival within the Tudor court's treacherous currents. In the shadowed alcove of the great hall, Margaret's voice dropped to a whispered counsel. "Trust is a luxury, Anne," she warned, her gaze steady and grave. "Many wear smiles like masks, and daggers are often hidden beneath silks. The Queen's confidence is precious, but you must guard your own heart from folly." Anne nodded, the weight of Margaret's words settling like a stone in her chest. The distant clatter of goblets and murmured conversations provided a constant reminder that the court was a living thing, ever swirling with secrets and schemes. Later, walking alone through the labyrinthine palace corridors, Anne's footsteps echoed softly against the stone walls. The tapestry of courtly life unfolded around her, laughter and music spilling from distant chambers, yet beneath the gaiety lurked a shadow she could not shake. The dagger she bore, the symbol of a deadly conspiracy, pressed against her side, a constant reminder of the stakes she faced. In the quiet of the Queen's private garden, Anne paused to watch Elizabeth from a distance. The Queen's commanding figure was framed by blooming roses, their delicate petals trembling in the gentle breeze. The rustle of leaves whispered secrets only the night understood. In that fleeting moment of peace, Anne's resolve crystallized. Her youthful fears gave way to a fierce determination to protect the woman who carried the fate of England upon her shoulders. Yet as she turned back toward the palace, the shadows lengthened, and the dangers of the court loomed ever larger. The Queen's confidence was a beacon, but Anne knew the path ahead would demand every ounce of courage and cunning she possessed. The fragile balance of trust and suspicion hung over her like a blade, and the question remained: whom could she truly rely upon in a world where alliances shifted with the flicker of candlelight? With a steadying breath, Anne pressed forward, the dagger close to her heart and the Queen's words echoing in her mind. The game was far from over, and she was no longer merely a watcher, but a player in the deadly dance of power and betrayal. The corridors of the Tudor court seemed to pulse with whispered secrets and veiled glances. Each step Anne Marwood took weighted with the knowledge of dangers lurking beneath the polished veneer of courtly grace. On this day, the air was thick with the scent of beeswax and rosewater, mingling with the faint rustle of silk and the soft murmur of voices that carried like a low tide through the vast halls. Anne had learned to move within this world with careful precision, but today a new threat emerged in the form of Lady Cecily Howard, a woman whose smile was as sharp as the blade Anne concealed beneath her skirts. Lady Cecily's reputation for cunning and ambition was well known, and her alignment with Lord Edmund Grey's faction made her a dangerous adversary. Anne had noticed the way her eyes lingered a little too long on her, the subtle tilt of her head as if measuring Anne's every move. It was during the morning's gathering in the gallery, where tapestries depicted the gloried reign of Elizabeth's predecessors, that Lady Cecily chose to weave her insinuations. Anne stood near a cluster of courtiers, her gaze steady but inwardly alert. Lady Cecily approached with a grace that belied the venom beneath her words. "Dear ladies," she began, voice lilting like a song, "one must always be cautious of those who carry secrets too heavy for their years. It is a perilous thing to hold such burdens close to the heart, especially within these walls." Her eyes flicked toward Anne, a subtle challenge cloaked in civility. A hush settled over the group as Lady Cecily's words hung in the air, a delicate web of accusation spun with the finesse only a practiced courtier could command. Anne's heart quickened, but her face betrayed no hint of the storm within. She offered a measured smile, a shield forged from composure and quick wit. "Secrets, Lady Cecily, are often the currency of survival in our realm," Anne replied softly, her voice steady. "Yet it is trust and loyalty that prove the truest strength." The courtiers exchanged glances, the tension palpable. Lady Cecily's smile faltered for a fraction of a heartbeat before she masked it with a nod. Anne's discreet deflection had bought her time, but the threat was undeniable. The dagger she bore, a silent testament to the dangers encircling the Queen, pressed against the confines of her bodice, a constant reminder of the stakes. Later, seeking solace and clarity, Anne slipped away to the Queen's private garden, a sanctuary where the air was cool and fragrant with blooming roses. The soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of a lark offered a brief reprieve as she leaned against the ancient stone wall, closing her eyes to steady her racing thoughts. The weight of the court's watchful eyes bore down, but within her, a fierce determination kindled anew. She would not falter. That evening, Anne found herself in the company of Lady Margaret Seymour, whose silver-streaked hair and piercing gaze bespoke years of navigating the treacherous tides of Tudor politics. Within the quiet intimacy of Margaret's chamber, Anne shared the day's encounter, her voice tinged with the unease beneath her practiced calm. "Lady Cecily's words are not without purpose," Margaret intoned, her tone both cautionary and consoling. "You must tread carefully, Anne. Every gesture, every glance is scrutinized. Yet remember, discretion and patience are your greatest allies. The court is a chessboard, and you must learn to anticipate your opponent's moves." Anne nodded, absorbing the wisdom. Her youthful inexperience was a liability, but with guidance and her own keen intuition, she could navigate these veiled threats. The path ahead was fraught with peril, yet the flame of loyalty to the Queen and the realm burned bright within her. Days later, during a formal gathering in the Great Hall, the tension between Anne and Lady Cecily reached a subtle crescendo. The hall was adorned with rich tapestries and flickering candlelight that cast elongated shadows upon the marble floor. Courtiers gathered in clusters, their voices a low hum beneath the strains of a lute. Lady Cecily approached Anne with a question loaded with implication, her eyes gleaming with the promise of confrontation. "Lady Marwood, one wonders how you manage your duties with such secrecy. Is there not a burden in carrying so many hidden things?" Anne met her gaze squarely, her lips curving into a composed smile. "Secrets are indeed heavy, Lady Cecily, but they are carried by many here. It is the trust we place in one another that lightens the load." Her words were a careful dance, deflecting suspicion while affirming her loyalty. The courtiers nearby exchanged subtle looks, sensing the unspoken duel of wits. Lady Cecily's smile was polite, but edged with frustration. Anne's poise had diffused the moment, yet the undercurrent of danger remained. That night, as Anne lay in her chamber, the weight of the day's encounters pressed upon her. The dagger's presence was a constant reminder that the court was a place where shadows moved with deadly intent. Yet within her stirred a resolve forged by fear, loyalty, and the fierce determination to protect the Queen at all costs. The game of intrigue was only beginning, and Anne Marwood was learning that, in the Tudor court, survival depended not only on strength, but on the deftness of one's mind and the courage to face veiled threats head-on. As the flicker of candlelight danced across her chamber walls, Anne whispered to herself, "I will not be undone." The night embraced her words, carrying them into the uncertain dawn that awaited. The heavy oak door creaked softly as Anne Marwood pressed herself against the cold stone wall of the Tudor palace corridor. The flickering glow of candle sconces cast long, wavering shadows, throwing the ancient tapestries into ghostly relief. Her breath was shallow, every inch of her taut with tension as muffled voices drifted from the chamber ahead. She clutched the dagger concealed beneath the folds of her gown, the cool metal a stark reminder of the peril she bore. Anna's heart hammered in her chest, each beat echoing the danger that lurked in the shadows of Elizabeth's court. She had arrived with a secret burden, a blade meant for the Queen's throat, and now that secret had led her here to the edge of discovery and beyond. The distant whisper of plotting nobles confirmed worst fears. Lord Edmund Grey's network of conspirators was active, their ambitions threatening to unravel the fragile peace that held the realm together. Peering cautiously from behind a heavy tapestry, Anna's sharp eyes caught glimpses of familiar faces, men and women cloaked in the pretense of loyalty, but whose true allegiance was sworn to treachery. Lord Grey himself stood at the center, tall and commanding, his cold grey eyes scanning the small circle with an air of unyielding authority. Nearby, Lady Cecily Howard's calculating gaze flicked between the conspirators, her poised elegance a mask for the dangerous intrigue she wove. The words they exchanged were hushed but laced with menace. Plans to destabilize the Queen's reign were laid bare, whispers of assassination, alliances with foreign powers, and the pivotal role of the hidden Dagger. Anne's stomach clenched as the full weight of her secret pressed down upon her. The blade she guarded was no mere trinket. It was the linchpin of a plot that could shatter the Tudor dynasty. Fear gripped her, yet beneath it burned a fierce determination. The loyalty that had brought her to court demanded action. She could not stand by as the crown teetered on the edge of ruin. But how to intervene without revealing her own hand? The labyrinth of court politics was fraught with peril, and one misstep could mean death not just for her, but for the Queen she revered. As the conspirators dispersed into the night, Anne slipped silently back into the shadows. The chill of the courtyard air wrapped around her like a shroud, the distant hoot of an owl a solemn companion to her solitary vigil. The Dagger's weight at her side was a constant reminder of the stakes, a burden she must bear alone. Returning to her chambers, Anne lit a single candle and unfurled the scraps of information she had gathered. Rumors, whispered confidences, and glimpses of court gossip formed a fragile tapestry of truth. Her mind raced, piecing together clues, weighing loyalties, and plotting her next move. Every flicker of flame cast long shadows, mirroring the darkness that threatened to engulf the realm. She knew the path ahead was fraught with danger, but retreat was not an option. The web of intrigue tightened around the Queen, and only Anne's courage and cunning stood between the blade and Elizabeth's life. With a steadying breath, she steeled herself for the trials to come, the silent promise of loyalty shining like a beacon in the encroaching gloom. Outside, the court continued its dance of masks and whispers, oblivious to the storm gathering beneath its polished surface. But Anne Marwood was no longer a mere observer. She was a player in the deadly game, her every choice rippling through the fragile balance of power. And as the shadows lengthened, one truth remained clear: the Dagger's shadow loomed large, and the fate of a kingdom hung in the balance. The night deepened, and with it, Anne's resolve. The web had tightened, there was no turning back now. The quiet rustle of silk skirts and the faint clink of metal echoed softly through the narrow corridors of Whitehall Palace as Anne Marwood made her way towards the secluded chamber behind the Queen's private apartments. Her heart thrummed with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. The dagger she had hidden close to her person weighed heavily, not just in her satchel, but in her soul. The moment had come to share her burden, to step beyond the lonely vigil she had kept and seek allies in the treacherous game unfolding around Elizabeth's throne. Inside the chamber, Lady Margaret Seymour stood near a window, her silver-streaked hair catching the last glow of the setting sun. Her piercing eyes, sharp as ever despite the years she had spent navigating Tudor court intrigues, softened slightly as Anne entered. Beside her, Sir Thomas Wycliffe leaned against the wooden table, his broad shoulders filling the space with quiet strength. His rough hands, calloused from years of swordsmanship, rested lightly on a stack of parchment maps and intercepted letters. Anne swallowed hard, her fingers clutching the folds of her gown as she stepped forward. "I have something to tell you both," she began, voice barely above a whisper. "A secret I have carried since my arrival, one that could endanger the Queen and all who serve her." Lady Margaret's gaze sharpened, and Sir Thomas straightened, his expression shifting from wary to alert. "Speak plainly, Anne," Lady Margaret urged, folding her hands calmly. Taking a deep breath, Anne revealed the truth. The dagger she concealed, meant for the Queen's harm, a symbol of the deadly conspiracy tightening its grip on the court. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the flickering of candlelight casting dancing shadows on the panelled walls. "You have done well to keep this hidden," Lady Margaret finally said, her voice low but firm. "But you cannot bear this alone. We must act, and quickly." Sir Thomas nodded, his blue eyes steady. "I swear my sword and loyalty to you and the Queen. Together, we can uncover those behind this plot and stop them before it's too late." The three leaned over the table, spreading out the intercepted letters and cryptic notes that had found their way into the Queen's household. The coded message from Lord Grey's faction lay open, a tangled web of words hinting at alliances with foreign powers and plans to strike at the heart of Elizabeth's reign. Their fingers traced the inked script, minds racing to decipher its meaning. Anne's youthful inexperience was tempered by Lady Margaret's wisdom and Sir Thomas's practical courage. Each brought strengths to the fragile alliance: Anne's keen intuition, Margaret's political savvy, and Thomas's readiness to act. Yet beneath the surface, personal tensions simmered. The unspoken romance between Sir Thomas and Lady Margaret complicated their interactions, adding layers of loyalty and doubt that Anne could not ignore. As the night deepened, the chamber became a crucible of whispered strategies and shared fears. Outside, the court carried on, unaware of the storm gathering in their midst. Anne felt the weight of her choices pressing down, yet within this alliance, a spark of hope flickered, a chance to protect the Queen she revered and the fragile peace of the realm. But trust in the Tudor court was as delicate as the finest lace, and every secret shared was a risk taken. Anne knew that the Dagger's shadow loomed still, a silent threat waiting to strike. The coming days would test their courage and cunning, and the fragile bonds they forged tonight might prove the kingdom's salvation or its undoing. As the candle burned low, Anne met Lady Margaret's steady gaze and Sir Thomas's resolute expression. "We begin at dawn," she said, voice steady despite the storm inside her. "For the Queen, for the realm, and for all we hold dear." Outside the chamber door, the distant murmur of the court's intrigues continued, but within those walls, a new force was gathering, a trio bound by loyalty, fear, and the fierce determination to face the darkness threatening to consume them all. The path ahead was uncertain, and the dangers many, but Anne Marwood had chosen her allies. Together, they would face whatever shadows the Tudor court dared to cast. The morning light filtered weakly through the narrow windows of Anne Marwood's chamber, casting pale bars across the worn wooden floor. She sat alone, the folded letter heavy in her hands, its inked words echoing in her mind like a grim refrain. The silence was thick, broken only by the occasional creak of the ancient beams overhead and the distant murmur of footsteps in the corridors beyond. The candle beside her flickered, sending shadows dancing across the walls, matching the turmoil that churned within her. Anne's fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded the letter again, reading the accusations once more. The words were veiled, but the meaning was unmistakable. Her family, the Marwoods, were under suspicion. Loyal servant or traitor's kin? The question hung in the air, loaded with peril. The careful balance she had tried to maintain between her love for her kin and her sworn allegiance to Queen Elizabeth now threatened to shatter. She pressed her palm to her forehead, seeking to steady the rising tide of anxiety. Her heart ached with a mingling of fear and betrayal, not yet from her family, but from the cruel whispers that now sought to unravel everything she had fought to protect. The court was a place where trust was a currency more precious than gold, yet now it seemed her family's name was becoming a mark of suspicion. The day had barely begun when Anne found herself in the great hall, its vastness swallowing the murmurs of courtiers like a hungry beast. She moved deftly, keeping to the edges, ears straining to catch any mention of her family. It did not take long. In hushed tones behind silk curtains and beneath the carved wooden balconies, courtiers whispered and cast furtive glances toward the Marwood name. Uncertain loyalties, one muttered. A family divided, another added, their words sharp as daggers. Anne's breath caught, her pulse quickening as she felt the walls close in. The stone pillars seemed colder, the chandelier's light harsher. She longed to confront the accusers, to demand their silence, but knew such fury would only deepen suspicion. Instead, she retreated, her mind racing for a plan to protect her family's honor without compromising her own fragile position. Later that afternoon, solace came in the form of Lady Margaret Seymour. They met in a quiet gallery where the scent of lavender lingered faintly among the heavy tapestries. Lady Margaret's silver-streaked hair caught the sunlight, her piercing eyes filled with both concern and resolve. "Anne," she said softly, placing a steady hand on her shoulder, "you carry a heavy burden. But remember, loyalty is not always visible to the eye. The court will test you, but so must you test your own heart." Anne absorbed the counsel, finding a glimmer of hope in the veteran courtier's words. Lady Margaret's experience was a beacon in the murky waters of treachery and suspicion, and though the road ahead was uncertain, she no longer felt quite so alone. Evening brought another visitor, Father Ambrose, who approached in the dim silence of the chapel. The flickering stained glass cast hues of crimson and emerald over the cold stone floor. His aged face was grave, his voice low but urgent as he shared the latest intelligence. The suspicions about the Marwoods were not mere gossip, but part of a wider scheme to destabilize loyal families within the realm. "You must be cautious, Anne," he warned, "for the shadows lengthen, and those who seek to harm the Queen will not hesitate to use any means necessary." The words settled heavily on Anne's shoulders, but beneath the weight, a flame of determination kindled. She would not allow her family's name to be weaponized against the crown, nor would she let fear dictate her actions. The dagger hidden close to her heart was not just a symbol of danger, but of the sacrifices required to protect all she held dear. That night, as the court slept under a blanket of uneasy quiet, Anne lay awake, the letter still clutched in her hand. She thought of her parents, of the whispered doubts that now shadowed their name, and of the path she must walk alone. Tomorrow would demand courage to face not only the intrigues of the court, but the fractures within her own bloodline. For in the Tudor court, loyalty was both a shield and a blade, and Anne Marwood was poised to wield them both. Her resolve solidified with the coming dawn. The dagger, once a secret burden, now became a symbol of the fierce loyalty that would guide her through the coming storm. The court was a maze of shadows and whispers, but Anne was determined to navigate its dangers, even if it meant standing against her own family for the survival of the realm. And so, with the fragile light of morning casting long shadows across the stone floors, Anne rose ready to face a family divided and a kingdom on the brink. The question was no longer if she could protect the Queen, but how much she was willing to sacrifice to do so. The game of power had many players, and Anne Marwood was learning, with every heartbeat, that trust was the most perilous of all. As the first rays of sun pierced the heavy curtains, Anne's eyes narrowed with steely determination. The court would soon see that beneath her composed exterior beat the heart of a woman unyielding in her loyalty and fierce in her courage, a heart prepared to face whatever betrayals lay ahead. The night had wrapped the Tudor court in a heavy cloak of silence, broken only by the distant murmur of guards and the occasional creak of ancient stone walls settling into darkness. Anne Marwood moved with careful steps through the labyrinthine passages of the palace, each footfall muffled by the thick tapestries that lined the corridors. A torch flickered against the damp stone, sending wavering shadows that danced like ghosts along the walls. Her heart beat steadily, but beneath that steady rhythm lay a tempest of nerves. The dagger hidden close beneath her gown, a cold reminder of the peril she bore, pressed lightly against her side. She wished it were not so, yet the weight of her secret was inseparable from her resolve. Ahead, the chapel awaited a sanctuary both sacred and secret. Father Ambrose, the Queen's confessor and a man whispered about in court circles as much for his piety as for his shadowy connections, had agreed to see her. The very idea of confiding in a cleric, especially one who trafficked in whispers as much as prayers, gnawed at Anne's conscience. But desperation had a way of bending principles, and she needed answers that no other courtier could provide. The heavy oak door to the chapel creaked softly as Anne pushed it open, stepping inside. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and incense, mingling in a heady perfume that soothed and unsettled in equal measure. Candles flickered in iron sconces, casting a gentle glow over the stone altar and the narrow, stained glass windows that caught the moonlight outside. In the stillness, Father Ambrose stood waiting, a figure clad in simple black robes, his face both wary and alert. "You come at a perilous hour, Mistress Marwood," he said quietly, his voice low but steady. Anne inclined her head, masking the trimmer in her hands. "There is no time for caution when the Queen's life is at stake, Father." He gestured toward the confessional booth, its latticework door ajar like an invitation and a warning. "Then let us speak in trust." Inside the small, enclosed space, Anne's breath came in shallow whispers. She spoke cautiously, veiling her questions beneath the guise of confession, probing for any hint of the conspiracies swirling just beyond sight. Father Ambrose listened, his keen eyes narrowing as he pieced together fragments of intelligence from her words and the unspoken fears she carried. "There are whispers of a new alliance," he murmured after a pause, "one that binds discontented nobles with foreign emissaries. A poison brewed in shadows, aimed at the heart of the realm." Anne's fingers clenched the fabric of her gown. "The dagger. It is not just a token of rebellion, but a blade meant to sever the crown's hold." Father Ambrose nodded grimly. "Indeed. The web tightens, and those who wield it are cunning. You must be careful whom you trust, Anne. The court is rife with eyes and ears." The weight of his words settled over her like a shroud. She felt the dagger again, cold and unyielding, a symbol of the peril that had become her burden. Emerging from the confessional, Anne took a moment to steady herself in the quiet of the chapel nave. The moonlight poured through the stained glass, painting the floor with shards of crimson and sapphire. Outside, the world was still, but she knew the calm was false. Danger lurked in every shadow. As she made her way back through the corridors, the faintest rustle caught her attention. Turning swiftly, she caught a glimpse of a figure cloaked and unseen vanishing into the darkness. A chill ran down her spine. Her secret meeting had not gone unnoticed. The stakes had just grown higher. Back in her chambers, Anne sat by the window, the dagger resting beside her as she pondered the revelations. Father Ambrose's intelligence was vital, but it had come at a price. Trust was a fragile thing in the Tudor court, and every alliance carried the risk of betrayal. Would she be able to navigate the treacherous waters ahead? Could she protect the Queen and keep her own secret safe? The night deepened, and with it, the shadows of doubt and danger. Outside, the palace slept, unaware that the fate of the realm rested in the hands of a young lady in waiting who dared to hold a blade meant for the crown. The coming days would test Anne's courage and cunning as never before. And as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, she knew her role in the deadly game was far from over. The dagger's shadow loomed large, and Anne Marwood was caught in its deadly embrace. The great hall shimmered under the glow of countless candles, their flames flickering like restless spirits in the heavy Tudor air. Anne Marwood stood near a marble column, her eyes scanning the crowd with a careful detachment that belied the turmoil tightening her chest. The court was alive with murmurs, half-heard tidings, and whispered suspicions that clung to the tapestry walls and echoed beneath the intricate wooden beams. Here every glance was a cipher, every smile a potential dagger. Tonight, more than ever, Anne felt the weight of the dagger hidden beneath her skirts, its cold steel a constant reminder of the peril she bore. Lady Cecily Howard drifted through the throng like a shadow with a purpose, her eyes sharp as a hawk's, glinting with the thrill of the hunt. Cecily's reputation as a cunning courtier was well earned, her allegiance to Lord Edmund Grey known only to a select few. She had the rare gift of feigning innocence, even as she planted seeds of doubt with poisonous precision. Anne's gaze met Cecily's for a fleeting moment, a challenge wrapped in silk and guile, and though her face remained composed, a shiver traced her spine. The evening had begun with the customary fanfare, lutes strumming softly in the corner, ladies in gowns of shimmering brocade, and nobles exchanging pleasantries laced with hidden meanings. Anne had managed to blend into this tableau with practiced ease, but the subtle shifts in the room's atmosphere betrayed the undercurrents of danger. She noticed how courtiers edged away from some, leaned toward others with conspiratorial whispers, and how Lady Cecily's smile grew sharper with each passing moment. Anne's thoughts were interrupted by a light touch on her sleeve. She turned to find Lady Margaret Seymour, whose silver-streaked hair caught the candlelight like a halo. Margaret's eyes, piercing and knowing, conveyed urgency without a word. "Keep your wits about you, Anne," Margaret murmured, her voice low. Lady Cecily's webs grow ever tighter. "You must be careful not to entangle yourself in them." Anne nodded, the mentor's warning sinking deep into her bones. Margaret's counsel had become a lifeline since Anna's arrival, a steady beacon amid the shifting tides of courtly intrigue. As the evening stretched on, Anne found herself drawn into a circle of nobles discussing the latest rumors from the continent. The Queen's health, foreign alliances, and whispered plots were the currency of conversation. Lady Cecily approached with the grace of a cat stalking her prey. Her voice honeyed as she addressed the group. "One wonders," Cecily said, glancing pointedly at Anne, "how such a young lady manages to garner the Queen's favor so swiftly. Some might say it is not without assistance." A hush descended. Eyes lingered on Anne, some curious, others calculating. The insinuation hung in the air like a blade poised to strike. Anne's heart quickened, but her voice was steady. "I serve with loyalty and honor, as any would in Her Majesty's presence." Margaret subtly stepped closer, her gaze flickering towards Cecily. Sir Thomas Wycliffe, standing nearby, tensed, his hand resting near the hilt of his sword. The unspoken message was clear. The game had shifted into a more dangerous realm. Later, in the quiet sanctuary of the Queen's chambers, Anne confided in Margaret. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows across their faces as Margaret's voice lowered to a whisper. "You must be more guarded, Anne. Cecily's ambitions are deep-rooted. She will probe for weaknesses. Trust is a luxury we cannot afford tonight." Outside the chambers, Sir Thomas moved with silent purpose. In the dim corridors, he confronted a courtier whose furtive glances had drawn suspicion. The clink of steel was brief but resolute, a reminder that protection often came at a cost. Returning to the hall, Anne found herself cornered near the tapestry-lined walls by Lady Cecily. The courtesan's smile was polite, yet the veiled threat was unmistakable. "You play a dangerous game, Anne," Cecily said softly, her voice a silk-wrapped blade. "One misstep and the Queen may find herself betrayed by those she holds closest." Anne met her eyes evenly, concealing the storm within. "Loyalty is a virtue not so easily shaken, Lady Cecily." The delicate dance of words and glances continued, each woman testing the other's resolve. Anne understood that survival depended not just on courage but on cunning, on the ability to turn suspicion into advantage without revealing her hidden truth. As the night deepened, Anne's thoughts raced. The dagger she guarded was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of the fragile balance of power and trust that sustained the Tudor court. Lady Cecily's maneuvers were a stark reminder that danger lurked behind every smile and beneath every pledge of loyalty. Yet Anne was no longer the naive girl who had arrived weeks before. Each whispered threat, each calculated look had steeled her resolve. She would protect the Queen with every breath, outwit those who sought to unravel the realm, and carry her secret through the storm. The spy's game had begun in earnest, and Anne Marwood was determined to play it to the end no matter the cost. The candle flickered once more, as shadows lengthened and the court's intrigue deepened, leaving Anne poised on the knife's edge of fate, ready for whatever dawn might bring. The candlelight flickered against the polished oak panels of the Queen's chambers, casting long shadows that danced like restless spirits. Anne Marwood lingered just beyond the heavy velvet curtain, her breath held as she strained to catch the fragile threads of conversation. The voices were low, urgent, and carried a weight that made her heart sink. Sir Thomas Wyclif's broad figure stood close to Lady Margaret Seymour, his usual stern expression softened by something Anne had never before witnessed, a vulnerability that unsettled her more than any threat from Lord Grey's conspirators. Lady Margaret's silver-streaked hair caught the light in a halo that belied the sharpness in her piercing eyes. Their words were careful, measured, but the tension between them was palpable. "You must not let this," Lady Margaret began, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "This feeling cloud your judgment, Thomas. The Queen needs unwavering loyalty, not divided hearts." Sir Thomas's reply was barely a whisper. "I serve the Queen with all my heart, Margaret. But it is hard to separate what the heart demands from what honor dictates." Anne's chest tightened. She wanted to step forward, to demand clarity, but instead she retreated silently, the weight of their fragile bond pressing heavily upon her. Could she rely on these two, bound by duty yet torn by desire, when every decision could mean life or death? Days later, the tension within the court grew thicker, suffocating like a dense fog. At a council meeting held in the Grand Hall, Lady Cecily Howard's sharp voice sliced through the murmurs. Her eyes gleamed with calculated malice as she spoke. "It has come to my attention that certain individuals within the Queen's household harbor secrets that threaten her safety. Such duplicity cannot be tolerated." A hush fell, all eyes darting nervously. Anne's pulse thundered in her ears as glances flickered her way, accusations unspoken but understood. Lady Cecily's relentless ambition was no secret, and Anne had the sinking certainty that this was only the beginning of a storm aimed directly at her. Later that evening, Anne found Sir Thomas in the dim corridors, the stone walls echoing their hurried footsteps. "You must be careful," she urged, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lady Cecily's intrigues grow bolder. If suspicion falls on me, the Dagger's secret will be lost forever." He met her gaze steadily, though the conflict within was evident. "I will protect you, Anne, but my duty to the Queen comes first. If your secret endangers her, I must act accordingly. And what of your heart?" Anne challenged softly, the question hanging between them like a fragile thread. Sir Thomas hesitated, the weight of impossible choices pressing upon him. When the realm is at stake, personal desires must be set aside. Meanwhile, in her solar, Lady Margaret sat alone, quill trembling in hand as she penned a letter whose contents she dared not speak aloud. Her heart ached with the pain of divided loyalties, torn between her unwavering service to Queen Elizabeth and the tender, dangerous feelings blossoming for Sir Thomas. Each word was a struggle, each sentence a sacrifice. Outside, the court whispered and watched, alliances shifting like the flickering candlelight. Anne knew that trust, once fractured, was not easily mended. The bonds that had held her fragile fellowship together were tested and strained, threatening to snap under the weight of secrets and desires. As the chapter closed, Anne gazed out toward the darkening horizon beyond the palace walls, the Dagger's shadow looming ever larger. The stakes had never been higher, and the path ahead was uncertain. Would loyalty endure when hearts wavered? Could she hold together the fragile threads of alliance before they unraveled completely? The night deepened, and in the silence, the court waited with bated breath for the next move in a deadly game where every bond was a potential betrayal. And every choice could tip the scales toward ruin or salvation. The corridors of the Tudor court seemed endless, a labyrinth of polished stone and whispered secrets that Anne Marwood knew all too well. Tonight, the atmosphere was thick with unease, the very air charged with suspicion and unspoken threats. Anne moved cautiously, each step measured, her dark hair drawn back tightly to maintain her composed demeanor. Yet inside, her heart hammered fiercely against the confines of her ribcage, as if desperate to escape the peril that shadowed her every move. Lady Cecily Howard's presence, had become an ever-growing menace, a silent predator circling with sharp eyes and a sly smile that barely concealed the venom beneath. Cecily's ambition was no secret in the court, nor was her ruthless desire to see Queen Elizabeth's reign falter. Tonight, Anne felt the weight of those intentions more keenly than ever. As Anne turned a corner, the faintest sound, a soft rustle of silk, alerted her. From the dim recesses emerged Lady Cecily, her gaze immediately locking onto Anne's with a piercing intensity that seemed to strip away all pretense. "Anne," Cecily's voice was low, silk-laced with menace, "there are whispers, you know. Secrets don't stay buried long in this court." Anne's breath caught. She was acutely aware of the dagger concealed beneath her gown, a silent blade that could topple kingdoms if revealed. Maintaining her calm, she smiled thinly. "Whispers are the currency of the court, Lady Cecily. They often say more about the teller than the tale." But the look in Cecily's eyes suggested this was a game far more dangerous than mere gossip. Anne's mind raced, calculating risks and weighing words. Any misstep could expose the dagger, and with it, the deadly conspiracy threatening the Queen's life. Retreating swiftly, Anne found refuge in her chambers, a modest room, illuminated by the flickering glow of a single candle. Shadows danced across the walls as her trembling fingers reached for the dagger, tracing its cold, unyielding steel. The weight of her secret pressed upon her like a physical burden. Youthful inexperience gnawed at her confidence, yet beneath the fear burned a fierce determination to protect the crown she revered. She knew she could not face this alone. The court was a web of intrigue, and trust was a fragile thread easily severed. Yet there was one she could rely upon: Sir Thomas Wycliffe. His loyalty was steadfast, his bravery a beacon amid the encroaching darkness. Later, under the shroud of night, Anne met Sir Thomas in the garden's secluded shadows. The rustling leaves whispered secrets as they spoke in hushed tones. "The danger grows," Anne confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lady Cecily's suspicion is no mere coincidence." Sir Thomas's gaze was resolute. "We will protect her, Anne, together." Their alliance, though tentative, kindled a spark of hope. Yet the stakes were clear. One misstep could mean death, not only for them but for the Queen herself. The following morning, Anne sought counsel with Lady Margaret Seymour, whose silver-streaked hair and piercing eyes bore the wisdom of years spent navigating the treacherous tides of Tudor politics. In the quiet of the Queen's audience chamber, shielded by heavy tapestries that muffled the noise of the bustling court, Lady Margaret's voice was firm yet kind. "You carry a heavy burden," she said, "but remember, courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it." Anne absorbed the words, feeling them anchor her resolve. The dagger's shadow loomed large, but she would not falter. The court was a battlefield of whispers and steel, and she was determined to emerge not as a pawn, but as a protector of the crown. As the day wore on, Anne moved with renewed purpose, her keen intuition guiding her through the tangled web of alliances and enmities. Yet the question lingered like a ghost in her mind: how long before the dagger's secret could no longer be hidden? And when that day came, would she possess the strength to confront the darkness that threatened to engulf them all? The dagger's shadow stretched long and ominous, but Anne Marwood's spirit burned brighter, still fierce, unyielding, and ready to face whatever dangers lay ahead. The chill of early evening settled over the Tudor court, wrapping its ancient stone walls in a cold embrace that seemed to seep into the very marrow of the palace. Anne Marwood moved softly through the dim corridors, her footsteps muted against the worn tapestry runners. Her heart fluttered like a captive bird, the weight of the secret she bore pressing ever more heavily upon her. Tonight, unlike other nights where silence offered a reprieve, she was to receive a message, one cloaked in shadows and danger. In the small, suffocating space of the chapel, the flicker of candlelight danced across the faces of saints carved in stone, their vacant eyes seeming to watch over the unfolding drama. Father Ambrose waited, a figure as much a part of the twilight gloom as the shadows themselves. His robes hung loosely, the threadbare fabric whispering secrets as he shifted nervously. "You must be vigilant, Mistress Marwood," he said quietly, his voice barely above a breath. The flickering flame cast shifting patterns on his lined face, shadows deepening the hollows beneath his eyes. "The dagger you carry is but one thread in a web that tightens with every passing hour." Anne nodded, swallowing the lump that threatened to rise. "Who sent the warning?" He shook his head, his lips pressed thin. "An ally unknown but trusted. The plot thickens. The attempt will come soon." From his hand, she accepted a folded note, the parchment rough and faintly scented with lavender. The weight of it felt heavier than mere paper, a harbinger of peril. Retreating to her chambers, Anne closed the heavy oak door behind her, the click echoing like a death knell in the quiet. The room was small but orderly, the faint scent of beeswax candles mingling with the faintest trace of rosewater. She unfolded the note with trembling fingers, eyes skimming the careful script. "The Queen's life hangs by a thread. Trust none but the fiercest flame." The dagger's shadow looms closer than you think. A shiver raced down Anne's spine. The words were vague yet unmistakably dire. She pressed her palms to her face, the coolness grounding her swirling thoughts. The court, already a maze of whispered threats and veiled glances, now seemed a powder keg ready to ignite. As dawn's pale fingers crept through the latticed window and sought Lady Margaret Seymour's chambers, finding the older woman in her morning ritual, arranging freshly cut lilies in a delicate silver vase, Anne hesitated before speaking. "Lady Margaret, I have received a warning. The danger approaches more swiftly than we feared." Margaret's eyes narrowed, the silver strands at her temples catching the light like threads of steel. "I feared as much. The court's undercurrents grow restless, and all too many eyes watch for a single misstep. You must tread carefully, Anne. Trust no one beyond this circle." Anne felt the weight of the council settle over her, a mantle as heavy as any crown. The Queen's safety was no longer a distant concern, but a battle waged in shadows and secrets. Later, in the shadowed courtyard, where the moon cast silver light over cobblestones slick with dew, Sir Thomas Wycliffe awaited. His broad frame was a solid presence against the night, his gaze steady and unwavering. "The Queen's guard is ever vigilant," he said softly, the roughness of his voice a comfort amid uncertainty. "We will not let the blade find her flesh." Anne met his gaze, gratitude and determination mingling in her chest. "But the threat comes closer each day. We must be cunning as well as brave." Sir Thomas nodded, the lines of worry etched faintly around his eyes. "Then we shall be both." Together, they plotted the delicate dance of protection and deception, knowing that every whispered word, every sidelong glance could betray them. The dagger's shadow stretched long across the court, a silent spectre heralding the coming storm. As the night deepened, Anne lay awake, the cryptic note clenched in her hand like a talisman. The court's grandeur felt brittle and fragile, a gilded cage where loyalty was a dangerous currency. Beneath the surface of velvet gowns and polished silver, treachery stirred, and Anne was caught in its deadly current. The warning had come, and with it, the knowledge that the game had changed. The Queen's life depended now not only on courage but on secrets kept and trust withheld. Anne's resolve hardened. She would face the coming darkness with fierce loyalty, even if it demanded the ultimate sacrifice. Outside her window, the first faint cries of the night watch echoed through the corridors, a reminder that in this palace of power, vigilance was the price of survival. The dagger waited, and so did the peril. In the days that followed, Anne moved through the court like a shadow, every step measured, every glance calculated. The whispers grew louder, the eyes more watchful. She confided only in Lady Margaret and Sir Thomas, their fragile alliance a beacon amid the swirling deceit. Father Ambrose's visits became more frequent, his information vital yet fraught with risk. Each meeting was a delicate balance between gaining knowledge and guarding secrets, for a single slip could unravel everything. Anne's nights were restless, haunted by visions of steel flashing in candlelight and the queen's serene face marred by betrayal. Yet beneath the fear, a fierce flame burned, a determination to protect the realm and the woman who ruled it with iron will and subtle grace. As the palace prepared for the coming royal event, where the dagger's shadow promised to fall, Anne steeled herself. The whispered warnings had set the stage. The final act was imminent. And in the heart of the Tudor court, amidst tapestries and treachery, a young lady in waiting would stand as the last line of defense against the blade destined to change history. But who would survive the coming storm, and at what cost? Anne's story was far from over, and the night held its breath, waiting for the next move in a deadly game of power and sacrifice. The heavy oak door to the private audience chamber creaked open, and a slender figure slipped inside under the cloak of twilight. The flickering candlelight revealed the anxious face of a courtier whose loyalty had wavered for weeks, the tension evident in the slight tremble of his hand as he approached Lord Edmund Grey. Grey's cold grey eyes narrowed as the whispered confession reached his ears. "So, the dagger lies hidden with the Queen's own lady in waiting," he murmured, voice low but laced with venomous glee. "This changes everything." The courtier swallowed hard, knowing the weight of his betrayal, but unable to resist the promise of power that Grey dangled before him. Outside the chamber, the corridors of the Tudor court remained oblivious to the storm brewing beneath their polished surfaces. Meanwhile, Anne Marwood sat alone in her chamber, the morning sun casting pale light through the lattice window. Her delicate features were drawn tight with worry. The secret she had guarded so fiercely was no longer safe. The knock at her door startled her. Lady Margaret Seymour entered swiftly, her silver-streaked hair catching the light like a beacon. "Anne, word travels fast. A trusted courtier has betrayed you," Lady Margaret said, her piercing eyes scanning Anne's face for signs of fear. Anne's breath hitched. "How much do they know?" "Enough to endanger the Queen and us all. We must act quickly." The door opened again, and Sir Thomas Wycliffe stepped inside, his broad shoulders tense, hands clenched. "I will stand by you, Anne, but we need a plan now." The three huddled close beneath the heavy tapestry adorning the wall, voices hushed but urgent. The great hall beyond buzzed with the murmur of courtiers, their eyes darting suspiciously, as rumors spread like wildfire. Trust was a scarce commodity, and Anne felt its absence keenly. In the shadows, Lady Cecily Howard watched with a cruel smile playing on her lips. Her sharp eyes gleamed with satisfaction as the plot thickened. "Let them scramble," she whispered, knowing the Queen's safety was more vulnerable than ever. Anne's mind raced. The dagger, the symbol of death and power, had become a deadly burden. She had to protect the Queen at all costs, but with betrayal so close, question remained. Who could she trust? As the day progressed, Anne navigated a labyrinth of whispers and glances, each step fraught with peril. The court's delicate balance teetered on the edge of chaos, and Anne's resolve hardened. She would not let the crown fall on her watch. Yet, beneath the surface of political machinations and whispered conspiracies, a darker truth, one that threatened to unravel everything Anne held dear. The dagger was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of the fragile power held by Queen Elizabeth I, and now, the blade's shadow loomed over the entire realm. Anne's journey from cautious observer to decisive actor was about to be tested as never before. The betrayal had thrust her into a desperate race against time, where every ally might be an enemy in disguise, and every choice could mean life or death. With the conspirators closing in, the court held its breath. Anne's courage, cunning, and fierce loyalty were all that stood between the Queen and the abyss. The dagger's secret was out. The game had changed, and so had Anne's fate. The flickering candlelight danced against the walls as Anne paced her chamber, the weight of the revelation pressing down on her chest like a physical force. The betrayal had shattered the fragile veil of safety she had wrapped around herself, casting her into a world where trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. Lady Margaret's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her own fears. We must alert the Queen discreetly. The court is rife with spies, and Lord Grey's men will be watching closely." Sir Thomas nodded grimly. "I'll increase the guards near Her Majesty and keep a close watch on the corridors. But we need to find out who betrayed you if we can silence them before they cause more harm." Anne clenched her fists. "I thought I knew whom I could trust. But now," Lady Margaret interjected, "we move carefully. The court is a maze of secrets, and one wrong step could be fatal." The three formed a silent pact, their alliance forged in the crucible of impending danger. Outside, the court carried on, oblivious to the storm gathering beneath its polished veneer. After Lady Margaret and Sir Thomas departed to carry out their tasks, Anne sat by the window, the cool morning breeze stirring the heavy curtains. The dagger lay hidden beneath her garments, a deadly secret pulsing against her side. Her thoughts drifted to her family, how fragile their loyalty seemed now, and how the political tides threatened to tear them apart. The burden was heavier than ever, but Anne's resolve hardened. She would protect the Queen, no matter the cost. The distant sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Anne's heart quickened. Every shadow now held a threat. Every glance was a potential betrayal. As she steeled herself for the trials ahead, the fragile peace of the Tudor court shattered, and the true battle for the crown's survival began. The dagger's shadow had fallen, and Anne Marwood was caught in its deadly grasp. The heavy oaken door to the servants' passage creaked open, just enough for Anne Marwood to slip inside, her small frame swallowed by the shadows immediately beyond. Torchlight flickered faintly from sconces mounted with an even spacing along the stone walls, casting dancing shapes that seemed to conspire with the dark to hide her flight. Her breath came quick and shallow, the weight of the dagger beneath her cloak a constant reminder of the peril she bore. Behind her, the murmured voices of pursuing courtiers echoed faintly, urgent and searching, but the labyrinth beneath the Tudor court was Anne's secret refuge. She moved swiftly, yet cautiously, feet soundless upon the cold flagstones, her eyes adjusting to dimness as she navigated the twisting corridors. Every corner held the possibility of discovery. Every shadow seemed to whisper betrayal. The scent of damp stone and aged wood filled the air, mingling with the faint trace of smoke from distant hearths above. A sudden clatter echoed from a loose stone, and Anne froze, heart pounding fiercely against her ribs. After a tense moment, only silence answered. Ahead, a narrow iron staircase spiraled upward, promising escape or confrontation. But Anne knew she could not face her pursuers alone. Her mind raced, recalling the steady presence of Lady Margaret Seymour and the fierce loyalty of Sir Thomas Wycliffe. They had to meet, to plan, to act. The Queen's life and the fragile peace of the realm depended on it. Anne reached a small chamber concealed behind a false wall, a hidden refuge known only to a handful. There Lady Margaret awaited, her silver-streaked hair catching the low torchlight, her piercing eyes sharp with worry and resolve. Sir Thomas stood nearby, broad-shouldered and tense, his sword sheathed, but his hand never far from the hilt. The air was thick with urgency and unspoken fear. "You made it," Lady Margaret said quietly, her voice a balm against the storm. "We feared you'd been caught." "Barely," Anne whispered, drawing the dagger from beneath her cloak and placing it on the rough oak table between them. "They know now. The dagger is no longer a secret." Sir Thomas's jaw tightened. "Then we have little time. Lord Grey's men will come for it and for you." Together, they bent over the map of the court's chambers and corridors, tracing possible routes of escape and paths to intercept their enemies. The conspirators' network was vast and shadowed, but so too was the knowledge Anne and her allies wielded. Each whispered strategy, each careful consideration of risks and strengths, shaped a fragile web of resistance. Anne felt the weight of her youth and inexperience, but also the hard edge of determination growing inside her. "We must protect the Queen," she said, voice steady despite the tremor beneath, "and expose those who would see her fall." Lady Margaret nodded. "Careful, child. The court is a serpent's nest. One wrong move and we are all undone." Sir Thomas's eyes met Anne's, fierce and unwavering. "I will stand by you whatever comes." Outside the chamber, distant footsteps approached, muffled but unmistakable. Anne pressed her back against the cold stone wall, the dagger a cold comfort in her clenched hand. Fear rippled through her, but beneath it surged a fierce loyalty, an unyielding flame that would not be extinguished. The night stretched on, a tense vigil of whispered plans and guarded hope. For Anne Marwood, the flight was only the beginning. The true battle for the crown, and for her own survival, lay ahead. And as dawn threatened the horizon, she steeled herself for the coming storm, knowing the fragile alliance she'd forged might be the realm's last hope. But even as they plotted, unseen eyes watched from the shadows, and the dagger's deadly purpose loomed ever closer. The game of power was far from over, and Anne's courage would be tested in ways she had yet to imagine. The corridors whispered secrets, the flickering torchlight played tricks, and the crown's fate hung by a slender thread one Anne was determined to hold. And so, in the heart of the Tudor court's darkness, a plan took shape, fragile yet fierce, born of fear, loyalty, and the desperate hope to protect a queen and a kingdom. The night was far from over, and the dagger's shadow stretched long. The great hall of Whitehall was awash in light and sound, a glittering arena where the Tudor court displayed its power and splendor. Hundreds of candles, nestled in ornate sconces and chandeliers, cast a warm golden glow upon the polished wooden floor and the rich tapestries that lined the walls. The scent of beeswax mingled with subtle hints of lavender and rosewater, perfumes worn by ladies and gentlemen alike, weaving an invisible tapestry of scent that added to the evening's grandeur. Anne Marwood stood near the eastern dais, her eyes fixed on Queen Elizabeth I. The Queen herself was a vision of regal authority, her red hair coiled tightly beneath a jeweled French hood, her gown embroidered with pearls and silver thread that caught the light with every subtle movement. Elizabeth's sharp gaze swept the crowd, her lips curved in a practiced smile that hid the constant vigilance demanded by her position. Anne's heart beat unevenly beneath the fine fabric of her gown. Months of careful concealment, whispered warnings, and shadowed glances had led to this night. The dagger she had secreted away, the very blade meant to end the Queen's reign, was suddenly poised to strike once more. The weight of its presence pressed on Anne's chest, a coiled serpent threatening to strike. The murmurs of the courtiers rose and fell like the tide, punctuated by the soft clink of goblets and the rustle of silk. Lady Margaret Seymour stood a few paces away, her silver-streaked hair framing a face that bore the marks of years spent navigating the treacherous waters of court intrigue. Her piercing eyes never left the Queen, ever watchful, ever calculating. Sir Thomas Wycliffe, broad-shouldered and grim-faced, patrolled near the rear of the hall. His hand rested lightly on the hilt of his sword, muscles taut and ready. Though outwardly a royal guard, he was Anne's secret ally, bound by loyalty to protect the Queen and those who served her faithfully. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. A subtle movement at the fringes of the crowd caught Anne's attention, a figure cloaked and masked, weaving through the nobles with unnerving purpose. The murmurs dulled to a hush as the figure drew closer to the dais, the glint of steel flashing in the candlelight. Gasps shattered the fragile calm as the masked attacker lunged forward, dagger raised high. The blade caught the firelight, a cruel gleam that seemed to pierce the very heart of the court. Time seemed to slow for Anne. The cacophony of startled voices melted into a roar in her ears. Instinct propelled her forward. She surged through the crowd, her breath sharp and ragged, fingers closing around the hilt of the dagger mid-thrust. The cold metal sent a jolt through her, but her grip held firm. The hall erupted into chaos as Sir Thomas sprang into action, his sword flashing in a swift arc to subdue the would-be assassin. Lady Margaret's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, restoring order amidst the turmoil. Her eyes met Anne's, conveying a silent message of approval and urgency. The Queen, though shaken, remained poised, her gaze steady and unyielding. Amid the uproar, Anne's gaze flickered to the shadows where Lord Edmund Grey stood, his tall frame rigid with suppressed fury. His cold grey eyes locked with hers for a moment, a silent vow passing between adversaries. The dagger's resurfacing had shattered the fragile veneer of peace within the court, exposing the dangerous undercurrents that threatened to engulf them all. Anne's swift action had saved the queen, but the path ahead was fraught with peril. As attendants restrained the attacker and whispers rippled through the gathered nobles, Anne felt the heavy weight of responsibility settle anew. The court's labyrinthine intrigues had become a battlefield, and she was no longer a mere observer, but a decisive player in the struggle for the crown's survival. The night deepened, the candles burning low, but the fire ignited within Anne's heart blazed brighter than ever. Loyalty demanded sacrifice, courage demanded action. The dagger might have been seized, but the fight for the realm's future was far from over. "The blade is but the beginning," Lady Margaret murmured as she approached Anne, her voice low yet resolute. "We must be ever vigilant." Anne nodded, her dark eyes reflecting the flicker of candlelight and steely determination. "For the Queen," she whispered, "and for the realm." Outside, the echoes of footsteps and distant voices signaled the gathering storm. Within the walls of Whitehall, the game had changed, and Anne Marwood was ready to play her part, whatever the cost. The hall's heavy oak doors closed behind the commotion, but Anne's mind raced ahead, plotting the next move in a deadly dance where trust was scarce and betrayal could come from any shadow. The dagger's legacy was not yet sealed, and the blade's edge still cut deep. As the Queen's court resumed its uneasy rhythm, Anne's thoughts lingered on the faces around her, the allies, the enemies, the uncertain. Each held a secret, a motive, a piece of the perilous puzzle. The night had tested her courage, but the true battle lay in the days to come. With a final glance at Elizabeth, radiant despite the threat, Anne vowed silently to protect the crown with every fibre of her being. The royal event was over, but the war for the throne was only beginning, and Anne Marwood was ready to meet it head-on. The heavy oak door to the council chamber groaned as it swung inward, the air thick with the scent of beeswax and old parchment. Anne Marwood's heart beat a frantic rhythm in her chest, each step towards the gathered nobles feeling like a march into the jaws of a trap. The room was dim, lit only by the flickering flames of wall sconces, their shadows dancing against tapestries that bore the Queen's emblem. At the center, Lord Edmund Grey stood tall and unyielding, his cold grey eyes scanning the assembly with the unmistakable air of a predator surveying his prey. Beside him, a handful of courtiers shifted restlessly, their faces masks of carefully rehearsed loyalty and hidden ambition. Anne's gaze snapped to the figure seated across the chamber, the trusted courtier whose smile had once seemed warm and honest, now twisted with the weight of unspoken guilt. His eyes avoided hers, darting nervously to the floor as he finally spoke, voice low and trembling. "I had no choice. Lord Grey threatened my family's safety. I revealed the secret to protect them." A cold shiver ran through Anne despite the chamber's warmth. Betrayal tasted bitter on her tongue, sharper than the dagger she had hidden so carefully. The air seemed to thicken, charged with tension as murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles. Lady Margaret Seymour's silver-streaked hair caught the firelight as she stepped forward, her voice cutting through the murmur like a blade. "This treachery endangers not only the Queen but the realm itself." Sir Thomas Wycliffe's broad shoulders squared in silent support beside Anne, his steady presence a small comfort amid the storm. Anne forced herself to meet the eyes of the betrayer, searching for any sign of the man she had once trusted. There was none, only fear and shame. Outside, the clamor of the court began to swell as news of the betrayal spread. Whispers twisted through the corridors like serpents, and Anne felt the cold weight of isolation settle upon her shoulders. She slipped away from the chamber, seeking refuge in the royal gardens where the night air was cool, and the scent of blooming jasmine clung to the breeze. Here, Beneath a canopy of stars, the betrayal stung sharpest not just the danger it brought, but the shattering of trust. Yet, even in this solitude, the fierce flame of loyalty burned within her. Lady Margaret and Sir Thomas found her moments later in the shadowed alcove, their faces etched with concern but resolute. Lady Margaret's hand rested lightly on Anne's arm, steadying her. "We will not let this treachery break us. The Queen's safety depends on our courage now more than ever." Sir Thomas's voice was low but fierce. "We stand with you, Anne. Together, we will unravel this conspiracy and protect Her Majesty." The betrayal had unmasked the danger lurking in the heart of the court, but it had also forged a new alliance, tempered in the fires of adversity. Anne's eyes, once uncertain and cautious, now gleamed with determination. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but she would walk it boldly. For the crown and for the Queen she vowed to defend. As dawn approached, the first pale light filtering through stained glass, Anne allowed herself a moment's breath. The game had changed, and the stakes had never been higher. Yet, she would not falter. The blade hidden close to her heart was not only a weapon of destruction, but a symbol of the sacrifices demanded by loyalty and the fierce courage needed to wield it. The night had revealed the faces of betrayal, but it had also ignited the flame of resistance. And Anne Marwood would be its fiercest guardian. The chamber doors opened once more, footsteps echoing with intent. The heavy oak doors of the great chamber swung open with a resonant thud, announcing the arrival of Queen Elizabeth I. The courtiers, gathered in anxious murmurs, fell silent as the monarch stepped into the flickering candlelight that danced across the polished flagstones. Her fiery red hair, a halo of flame against the somber walls, caught the glow of the torches, illuminating the sharp angles of her face, a visage both beautiful and formidable. Her eyes, sharp and piercing, roamed the assembly with the keen gaze of a hawk, weighing each noble, each adviser, each spy who dared to meet her stare. Anne Marwood stood near the back of the chamber, her heart pounding with a mixture of dread and hope. The weight of her secret, the dagger she had hidden, the peril she had borne pressed heavily upon her chest. Yet, as the Queen's voice rose, steady and commanding, the tension in the room shifted. Elizabeth's words were clear and unwavering. "Let it be known that those who conspire against the crown shall face the full measure of justice. The realm shall not be undone by shadows and whispers. I stand unbroken, and my resolve is as sharp as the blade that sought to end me." A murmur of assent rippled through the gathered nobles, but it was the next moment that truly caught Anne's breath. The Queen's gaze swept across the chamber, settling on the young lady in waiting whose quiet dedication had not gone unnoticed. "And to the loyal few who guard my person and my honor," Elizabeth declared, her voice softening with rare warmth, "your bravery shall not be forgotten. Mistress Anne Marwood, your courage in the face of treachery has been steadfast. You have my trust, and with it, a place by my side in the days to come." The chamber erupted into whispered astonishment. Anne's cheeks flushed, a tide of conflicting emotions swelling within her: pride, fear, and the sobering weight of new responsibility. Lady Margaret Seymour stepped forward, her silver-streaked hair shimmering like a banner of wisdom, and gave Anne a subtle nod of approval. Sir Thomas Wycliffe, ever vigilant, stood resolute beside the Queen, his presence a silent promise of protection. As the Queen continued to outline the measures to root out the conspirators, the doors at the far end of the chamber were thrown open again. Lord Edmund Grey was brought before them, his tall, imposing frame shackled, his cold grey eyes burning with defiance. The once favoured adviser now stood diminished, yet the air crackled with the tension of his unbowed spirit. Elizabeth fixed him with a gaze that brooked no challenge. "Your ambitions have brought ruin upon you, Lord Grey. The crown endures, and with it, the hope of England." Grey's lips curled into a bitter smile. "The crown is but a fragile thing, Your Majesty. One blade, one whisper can sever it from its throne." Anne's pulse quickened. The danger was not past. It lingered like a shadow in the corners of the court. But in this moment, the queen's resolve was a beacon, fierce and unyielding. Later, as the chamber emptied and the echoes of confrontation faded, Anne found herself alone with Lady Margaret and Sir Thomas in a quiet antechamber. The flickering light cast long shadows, but the warmth of their shared commitment steadied her. "The Queen has placed her faith in you," Lady Margaret said softly. "That trust will be tested, but you are no longer merely an observer. You are a player, Anne." Sir Thomas nodded, his eyes serious yet encouraging. "We stand with you. Together, we'll protect Her Majesty and see this court through the storm." Anne inhaled deeply, the scent of beeswax and parchment filling the air. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but she felt a fierce determination ignite within her, a flame of courage that would not be easily extinguished. As night deepened over the Tudor palace, Anne gazed out toward the shadowed gardens, where unseen eyes no doubt watched and waited. The crown's survival depended on vigilance, on sacrifice, and on the strength of those who dared to stand in the face of betrayal. And Anne Marwood would be among them, her loyalty a blade sharper than any forged of steel. The court had shifted. The game was far from over. But for the first time, Anne felt the steady pulse of power in her own hands and the heavy promise it carried. With the Queen's resolve as her guide, Anne stepped forward into the uncertain dawn. The flicker of candlelight cast dancing shadows on the tapestries that lined the great chamber, their embroidered scenes of conquest and peace a silent testament to England's enduring spirit. Elizabeth's voice echoed, clear and resolute, weaving a tapestry of words that bound the court together in a shared purpose. Her fiery hair crowned her like a living flame, illuminating the steely determination that lay beneath the surface of regal elegance. Anne's eyes searched the faces before her, the wary nobles, the anxious courtiers, the silent guards, all caught in the orbit of the Queen's commanding presence. The chamber hummed with restrained tension, a fragile calm poised on the edge of eruption. When Elizabeth turned her gaze on Anne, the young lady in waiting felt warmth flood her cheeks. The Queen's acknowledgement was no mere courtesy. It was a public declaration that shifted Anne's place within the intricate hierarchy of the Tudor court. She was no longer hidden in the shadows but brought into the light, a trusted guardian of the crown. Lady Margaret's approving glance and Sir Thomas's steadfast stance bolstered Anne's courage. Yet, beneath the surface, a quiet unease stirred. The arrival of Lord Grey, shackled yet defiant, was a stark reminder that the battle for England's future was far from won. Grey's chilling words lingered in the air, a dark promise that the dagger was but one of many threats lurking in the corridors of power. Elizabeth's unyielding stare was a shield, but the shadows pressed ever closer. In the stillness that followed, Anne's resolve hardened. The Queen's faith was a mantle she would bear with honor, but also a burden that demanded constant vigilance. The court was a labyrinth of peril and possibility, and Anne was determined to navigate its twists with cunning and courage. As the night deepened, the murmur of whispered plots faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of duty and determination. The Queen's resolve was a beacon in the encroaching darkness, and Anne Marwood would stand as its unwavering guard. The dagger's shadow had not been banished, it had only sharpened. And so the game of crowns and blades continued, with Anne poised at its heart, ready to face whatever dawn might bring. The council chamber was cloaked in shadow, the flickering candlelight casting uneasy shapes upon the ancient tapestries that lined the walls. Murmurs of discontent and suspicion echoed off the stone, each word heavy with the weight of impending confrontation. Anne Marwood stood at the center, her breath steady despite the storm that threatened to break loose. Around her, Lady Margaret Seymour's silver-streaked hair caught the dim light, her posture resolute and commanding. Sir Thomas Wycliffe's broad frame was a fortress beside them, his hand resting lightly yet firmly on the hilt of his sword. Lord Edmund Grey entered with an air of cold authority, his tall figure looming beneath the vaulted ceiling. His grey eyes, sharp as a blade, swept the room with a calculated gaze that seemed to pierce through the very souls gathered before him. The tension was palpable. It pulsed like a living thing in the stale air. "So, the loyalists have gathered." Gray's voice was low but carried the unmistakable edge of menace. I had hoped for a quieter resolution. Anne's fingers tightened around the folded parchment. She held the proof of his treachery. She met his gaze squarely, her voice unwavering. "Your schemes end here, Lord Gray. We have the evidence of your conspiracy against Her Majesty." A ripple of disbelief and shock passed through the courtiers, the chamber falling into a brittle silence, save for the crackle of the hearth's dying embers. Gray's mouth curled into a scornful smile. "Evidence. You mistake ambition for treason, girl. Your naivety blinds you to the truth that this realm needs a stronger hand than Elizabeth's." Lady Margaret stepped forward, her tone icy and precise. "This realm needs a queen who commands loyalty, not a usurper who cloaks his desires in lies." Her words struck like a bell, clear and undeniable. Sir Thomas's hand moved with swift certainty, drawing his sword with a sharp ring that echoed through the chamber. He stood guard before the grand portrait of Elizabeth, a living shield against the threat Gray posed. Gray's composure faltered, a flicker of frustration flashing in his eyes. "You will regret this insolence," he hissed, but the loyal guards surged forward, their armor clinking softly as they closed in. Anne felt a rush of adrenaline and relief as the traitor was bound and taken into custody, his schemes unraveling like the threads of a broken tapestry. Yet as the chamber emptied and the immediate danger passed, Anne's heart remained heavy. The court was safe for now, but the price of loyalty was steep, and the shadows of ambition lingered still. Lady Margaret's gaze met hers, a silent understanding passing between them, a vow to remain vigilant in the fragile peace that had been won. That night, as Anne stood by the Queen's chambers, the weight of the dagger she once hid seemed to lessen, replaced by a fierce determination. The game of power was far from over, but in this moment, courage had prevailed. And as the flicker of candlelight danced across the chamber walls, Anne knew the blade's legacy was only beginning. The great hall was awash with a tense stillness that contrasted sharply with the storm of recent events. Torches flickered along the stone walls, casting long shadows that danced like restless spirits. Anne Marwood stood near the periphery, her heart pounding beneath the bodice of her gown, eyes fixed on the figure of Lord Edmund Gray. Bound in heavy chains, his tall, imposing frame was stooped slightly, but his cold grey eyes remained unyielding, burning with the same ambition that had driven him to conspire against the crown. The hall brimmed with courtiers, their faces masks of shock, relief, or concealed calculation. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a rising tide, though none dared speak openly. Queen Elizabeth I sat upon her throne, a vision of regal composure. Her sharp eyes scanned the assembly, her lips pressed into a line of steel. When she finally rose, the murmurs ceased, replaced by a suffocating silence. "Lord Edmund Gray," the Queen's voice rang clear and unwavering, "you stand accused of treason against your sovereign and the realm. Your plots have been laid bare, and justice will be served. Let this be a warning to all who would threaten the peace of England." Anne felt the weight of those words settle upon her like a storm cloud, heavy and ominous. The capture of Lord Gray was a victory, yet it felt incomplete, as if the true battle was only beginning. She exchanged a glance with Lady Margaret Seymour, whose weathered face was unreadable, but whose eyes gleamed with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. After the formal proceedings, Anne retreated to a quiet chamber with Lady Margaret and Sir Thomas Wycliffe. The flickering candlelight played upon their faces, revealing the tension etched into their features. "This is but one victory," Lady Margaret said softly, folding her hands in her lap. "The court is a serpent's nest. For every head we cut off, another rises." Sir Thomas nodded, his gaze steely. "Gray's capture has shaken their resolve, but we cannot let our guard down. There are still those who lurk in the shadows, waiting for a chance." Anne swallowed her fear and nodded firmly. We must root them out before they strike again. The Queen's safety depends on it." Their whispered conversation was interrupted by a soft knock. Father Ambrose entered, his expression grave. "There are troubling reports," he murmured. "Foreign agents move quietly through the city, and some courtiers remain suspiciously silent. The web of conspiracy is not yet unraveled." The three exchanged glances, understanding the unspoken truth. The capture of Lord Grey was a turning tide, but the sea of intrigue was far from calm. Later that night, Anne found herself alone on a balcony overlooking the palace gardens. The moon cast a silver glow over the neatly trimmed hedges and marble statues, shadows pooling like ink beneath the ancient oaks. The cool night air was a balm to her racing thoughts, yet it carried whispers of uncertainty. She thought of her family, whose loyalty was questioned in recent days, and of the delicate balance she had to maintain between duty and survival. The dagger she had hidden so carefully now felt like a distant memory, yet its legacy lingered in every cautious step she took. A rustle from the shadows made her turn, and Sir Thomas stepped onto the balcony, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the night sky. "The court sleeps uneasily tonight," he said quietly, "but with you at the Queen's side, I believe we stand a chance." Anne met his gaze, finding strength in his steadfast presence. "Then we must be ever vigilant. The crown's survival depends on it." As the first light of dawn tinged the horizon with pale gold, Anne felt a fierce determination ignite within her. The turning tide had come, but the war for the Queen and the realm was far from over. In the shadows of the Tudor court, she would stand firm, a silent blade against the encroaching darkness. The events of the day would ripple through the corridors of power, their consequences unfolding like the petals of a dark flower. Anne's journey was only beginning, and the fragile peace they had won was but a fleeting breath in the ever-shifting dance of loyalty and betrayal. The chamber was cloaked in shadows, the only illumination the trembling flame of a single candle perched on the heavy oak table. Anne Marwood sat quietly, her delicate hands folded in her lap, eyes distant as the weight of recent events settled heavily upon her. The air was thick with the scent of wax and aged wood, the silence punctuated only by the faint crackle of the flame. Outside, the distant murmur of the court's restless heartbeat echoed faintly, reminding her that peace, though claimed, was fragile and uncertain. She traced the outline of the dagger's hilt in her mind, the cold metal a symbol of peril and sacrifice. The conspiracy to end Queen Elizabeth's reign had been thwarted, but the cost was etched deep within her soul. Faces of those lost and betrayed lingered in her thoughts, and the burden of survival pressed upon her with an almost suffocating intensity. How many had she lost? How many had been forced to betray, to deceive, just to hold the crown steady? A soft knock at the door stirred her from her reverie. Lady Margaret Seymour entered, her presence a calm anchor amid the storm. Her silver-streaked hair caught the candlelight, framing a face lined with the wisdom of years and the scars of countless court battles. She moved with an elegant grace, settling beside Anne with a gentle smile. "Still awake, child?" Margaret's voice was low, threaded with concern and warmth. Anne nodded, swallowing the lump that threatened her voice. "I find it difficult to rest. The court feels different now, quieter, yet heavy with unspoken fears." Margaret's eyes softened, her fingers brushing Anne's hand in a rare gesture of comfort. "That is the nature of our world. The peace we hold is but a breath between storms. You have done well, far beyond what I could have hoped. But there will always be price to pay." Anne met her gaze, the resolve hardening within her, "And yet, we must bear it. For the Queen, for the realm." The next day brought an audience with the Queen herself, an occasion steeped in both honor and quiet gravity. Queen Elizabeth I received Anne in the tapestry-lined chamber, her regal bearing undiminished, but tempered by recent trials. The monarch's sharp eyes met Anne's with a mixture of gratitude and solemn recognition. "You have served me well, Anne," the Queen said, her voice steady but carrying the weight of command. Your bravery and discretion have preserved not only my life, but the very stability of this court." Anne bowed deeply, her heart swelling with pride yet shadowed by the cost. "It is my honor, your majesty. I only wish the peace we have won might endure longer." Elizabeth's gaze lingered, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through her formidable facade. "Peace is a fleeting visitor in this place. But with loyal hearts such as yours, we may yet keep her at our side for a time." As Anne left the chamber, the Queen's words echoed in her mind, hope tempered by caution. The court was a precarious stage, each player poised between survival and ruin. Later, in the cool dusk of the castle's courtyard, Anne found herself walking beside Sir Thomas Wycliffe. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of falling leaves and distant smoke. His broad shoulders were squared against the chill, yet his expression was thoughtful, mirroring the tension that still gripped them both. "We've seen the worst, and yet I fear it may not be the end," Thomas admitted quietly. "There are always shadows lurking beyond our sight." Anne glanced at him, the flicker of determination bright in her eyes. "Then we must be ready. For loyalty, for courage. We carry the crown's fate, and we will not let it fall." They paused beneath a towering oak, its leaves rustling softly in the breeze, a reminder that even amid decay, life persisted. Anne drew a steadying breath, feeling the flame of resolve rekindle within her. The court may have found a moment's peace, but the dance of power and betrayal would continue. Anne Marwood was no longer merely a watcher in the shadows. She was a player, a guardian of a fragile kingdom. The road ahead was uncertain, but her heart was steadfast. As night deepened, Anne returned to her chamber, the candlelight casting long shadows that flickered like ghosts of the past. She settled once more into her thoughts, the dagger's legacy etched forever in her memory. Loyalty demanded sacrifice, courage demanded risk, and survival demanded vigilance. The crown's survival was a promise she would carry into every dawn, come what may. And so, beneath the quiet stars, the fragile peace held for now. The heavy oak door of Anne's chamber closed with a soft thud behind her, sealing her away from the murmurs and laughter that drifted faintly from the distant great hall. The flickering candlelight cast wavering shadows across the walls, their shapes twisting like the secrets Anne carried within her heart. She seated herself by the narrow window, the coldness of the glass a stark contrast to the warmth of the hearth fire beside her, and allowed her eyes to rest on the slender dagger tucked beneath the hem of her sleeve. Though the blade was small, its weight in her mind was immense, a silent testament to the peril that had nearly engulfed the court, and the fragile peace that now seemed to hang by a thread. Anne's fingers traced the delicate embroidery on her gown, her thoughts swirling like autumn leaves caught in a restless breeze. The events of the past weeks played relentlessly behind her lids, the whispered conspiracies, the betrayal of trusted allies, the near brush with death during the royal event. The dagger had been concealed, and the immediate threat had been quelled, yet a gnawing unease clung to her like a shadow that refused to be chased away. The court's laughter and music were but a veneer, masking the ever-present dangers lurking within its gilded walls. A soft knock at her door drew Anne's attention. In stepped Lady Margaret Seymour, her silver-streaked hair catching the candlelight, her piercing eyes somber yet resolute. "May I come in, Anne?" she asked quietly. Anne nodded, welcoming the presence of the woman who had become both mentor and confidant. Margaret moved to the window, gazing out at the moonlit courtyard before turning back to Anne. "The court breathes uneasily," she said, her voice low but edged with urgency. "You must understand, child, that not all threats are as plainly drawn as a dagger's edge. Some wear smiles and speak honeyed words while hiding knives beneath their cloaks." Anne met her gaze steadily. "I know the peace we see is but a fragile mask. I will not be caught unprepared." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "Good, because vigilance is our greatest weapon now." Later, in the shadowed corridor outside the Queen's private chambers, Sir Thomas Wycliffe stood sentinel. His broad shoulders filled the narrow space, and his rough hands rested lightly on the hilt of his sword. His gaze flicked along the dimly lit passage, alert for any sign of danger. When Anne approached, their eyes met a brief, wordless exchange passing between them, a shared understanding forged in peril and loyalty. "The court holds its breath," Sir Thomas said softly, his voice steady but tinged with wariness. "But I will not let it fall." Anne nodded, a flicker of gratitude warming her chest. "Nor will I. Together, we stand as the Queen's shield." The labyrinthine corridors of the palace seemed to close around them, every shadow a potential threat, every whisper a possible secret. They moved as one, guardians of a fragile peace, bound by a common cause and the knowledge that their vigilance must never falter. In the quiet sanctuary of the chapel, the flicker of candlelight danced across the stained glass, painting colored patterns on the stone floor. Father Ambrose waited, his aged hands folded in front of him, eyes sharp and unyielding despite the years etched into his face. He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper as Anne approached. "There are forces at work you do not yet see," he cautioned, his tone heavy with reluctant trust. "The dagger was but a beginning. Secrets buried deep within these walls will rise again, and you must be ready." Anne swallowed, the weight of his words settling over her like a mantle. "I will not fail the Queen." Father Ambrose inclined his head. "Then keep your wits sharp and your heart guarded. The court is a web of shadows, and only the vigilant survive its snares." As Anne left the chapel, the echoes of her footsteps mingled with the distant chime of the palace clock, marking the passage of time that would demand her unwavering attention. The sword's edge may have been sheathed, but the war for the crown's survival was far from over. Night deepened, and Anne lingered once more by her window, eyes tracing the silhouette of the moonlit gardens below. The fragile piece was a fleeting thing, a candle flame flickering against the dark. But within her burned a flame of resolve, fierce and unyielding. She would watch, wait, and when the shadows moved, she would be ready. The court's secrets whispered like ghosts in the corridors, and Anne Marwood, lady-in-waiting and reluctant guardian, would not let the crown fall into darkness. For in this world of intrigue and betrayal, only the vigilant could hope to survive, and only the courageous could hope to triumph. And so the night stretched on, endless and filled with unseen threats. Anne's eyes never left the shadows. The game was not yet won, and the blade's legacy was yet to be decided. But she would be ready. The flicker of candlelight caught in her gaze as she prepared once more to face the court's endless dance of power. The shadows lingered, but so did her resolve. The great hall of the Tudor court was awash with light from the towering chandeliers, their crystal prisms scattering 1,000 tiny stars across the polished floor. The assembled courtiers stood in hushed anticipation, whispers weaving through the gilded columns like restless spirits. At the far end, Queen Elizabeth I sat upon her throne, a vision of regal splendor, her crimson gown embroidered with pearls that caught the light with every subtle movement. Her gaze swept across the room, sharp and commanding, before settling on Anne Marwood. The young lady stood poised, her delicate features composed, dark hair neatly drawn back to reveal a countenance marked by quiet resolve. This court has witnessed bravery and loyalty tested in the shadow of treachery. The Queen's voice rang clear, carrying the weight of her authority. Among us stands a woman whose courage has preserved the very heart of our realm. Anne Marwood, from this day forth, you shall hold a place of greater trust and honor at my side. Let this be known, your service is indispensable to the crown. A ripple of murmurs spread through the assembly, some of admiration, others tinged with envy. Anne's heart quickened, pride mingling with the gravity of the moment. The elevation was not merely a reward, it was a summons to a perilous new station where every step must be measured, every word weighed. As the ceremony drew to a close, Anne found herself escorted to the Queen's private chambers. The opulence of the room was softened by the warm glow of candlelight, the scent of lavender and beeswax mingling in the still air. Elizabeth regarded her with a mixture of expectation and something softer acknowledgement, perhaps of the burden now shared. "The court is a treacherous sea," the Queen murmured, "and you must learn to navigate its currents with both wisdom and caution. Your past deeds have earned my trust. Do not let it waver." Anne bowed deeply, every word etching itself into her resolve. "I shall serve with all my heart, Your Majesty." Later, in the quiet sanctuary of her chambers, Anne allowed herself a moment of solitude. Her fingers traced the intricate embroidery of her new gown, a fabric richer than she had ever worn before, while distant echoes of courtly life drifted through the open window. The laughter, the whispered schemes, the clatter of servants' footsteps, all reminders that the delicate balance of power was as fragile as the lace at her sleeves. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Lady Margaret Seymour entered, her silver-streaked hair catching the candlelight as she smiled with knowing warmth. "You wear your new rank well, Anne," she said, settling beside her. "But remember, the higher the perch, the sharper the fall." Anne met her mentor's piercing eyes, gratitude and unease mingling within her. "I understand. But I cannot turn away now, not when so much depends on vigilance." Margaret nodded, her expression grave. "Then you shall need all your wits about you. The court's shadows lengthen with every passing day." Meanwhile, beyond the Queen's chambers, Sir Thomas Wycliffe stood sentinel. The evening air was crisp, the faint scent of damp earth and burning wood mingling under the moonlit sky. His posture was rigid, hands resting lightly on the hilt of his sword, eyes scanning the corridors for any sign of danger. Loyalty to both Queen and Lady-in-Waiting fortified his resolve inside, and prepared for the uncertain days ahead. Her promotion was a beacon of hope, but also a herald of new perils. She knew the dagger's shadow lingered still, not just in the hands of foes, but in the fragile alliances woven through the court's tapestry. A soft breeze stirred the curtains, carrying the distant strains of lute and laughter. The game of power was far from over, and Anne Marwood was now a key player. With steady breath and sharpened mind, she stepped forward into her new destiny, the weight of crown and blade resting heavily upon her shoulders. As the night deepened, the court's flickering candlelight danced upon walls lined with portraits of monarchs, past silent witnesses to the fragile legacy Anne was now charged to protect. The flame of courage kindled within her heart, fierce and unwavering, ready to illuminate the perilous path ahead. Yet, as the echoes of celebration faded, a question lingered in the cool air, in a court where trust was scarce and betrayal ever near. Could Anne truly safeguard the Queen she revered, or would the blade's legacy claim another victim? The answer lay shrouded in the uncertainty. The heavy oaken door creaked open, and Anne Marwood stepped into the drawing room of her family's estate. The familiar scent of burning wood and aged parchment wrapping around her like a shroud. Her heart thudded unevenly, a mixture of anticipation and dread weighing on her slender shoulders. The polished mahogany furniture gleamed faintly in the glow of a solitary candle, its flame flickering against the high tapestry-covered walls. There, seated with a poised yet guarded expression, was Lady Marwood, her mother, the silver-threaded dark hair framing a face marked by years of both grace and stern resolve. "Anne," her mother began, voice smooth, but edged with something Anne could not yet place, "you have been away too long. The court is no place for a young lady to bear such burdens alone." Anne's eyes met hers steadily. "I carry what must be borne, mother. The crown's safety is my charge as much as our family's honor." A flicker of pain crossed Lady Marwood's eyes before she masked it with a sharp glance. "Honor is not easily preserved when trust is fractured. Your father and I have heard whispers, suspicions that your loyalty may be divided." The words hit Anne with the force of a winter gale. She clenched her hands at her sides, the delicate skin blanching. "My loyalty has never wavered. It is the crown that must be preserved, even at great cost to us all." Silence stretched between them, taut and fragile, until Lady Marwood finally exhaled. "Then you must prepare, my daughter. The tides of politics shift swiftly, and family is often caught in their undertow. Later, in the estate's garden under the gathering dusk, Anne found her father pacing beneath the twisted branches of an ancient elm. His graying beard was set firm, his eyes shadowed yet searching as he regarded her. "You bring danger to our door, Anne," Lord Marwood said quietly, the wind tugging at his cloak. "The court's intrigues are no place for a child of our house to meddle." "I am no child, father," Anne replied, stepping closer. "I act for the realm's survival. Our family's future depends on the Queen's reign." He shook his head slowly. "And yet, there are those who question your motives. They see the dagger you hide, the secrets you keep. How do you expect the family to stand united when suspicion breeds division?" Annie's jaw tightened. "By showing them that loyalty to the crown need not sever the bonds of blood. I will not abandon you, nor the Queen." In that moment, the wind rustled the dry leaves, a whispered promise of trials yet to come. Back at court, Anne sought counsel with Lady Margaret Seymour and Sir Thomas Wycliffe. The flickering candlelight threw dancing shadows across the richly embroidered tapestries as the trio huddled close. "Your family's doubts are a peril as real as Lord Grey's conspiracies," Lady Margaret observed, her voice low and steady, "but your resolve can turn the tide yet." Sir Thomas nodded, his broad shoulders tense but his eyes unwavering. "We stand with you, Anne. The Queen's safety is our cause, and yours is a courageous heart." Their quiet determination lent Anne a new strength. The murmurs of the court, faint yet unceasing, reminded her that vigilance was the price of survival. As the day waned, Anne found herself alone by the window of her chambers, the sprawling Tudor gardens bathed in the bruised purples and fiery oranges of sunset. The world seemed caught between light and shadow, much like the fragile alliances she sought to mend. Her reflection stared back at her, a young woman caught between duty and desire, between family and crown. The delicate balance of loyalty stretched taut across her heart, and she knew that the bonds she fought to preserve were as perilous as the blade she once hid. Outside, the first stars began to gleam, cold and distant, as if watching the unfolding drama of a kingdom held hostage by trust and betrayal. Anne's breath caught, her fingertips brushing the cool glass. The ties that bound her were both her strength and her burden. Yet, in the quiet resolve settling within her, she found a flicker of hope, a promise that even fractured loyalties might be healed, if only she dared to reach beyond the shadows. And as the night deepened, so too did the weight of her choice, poised on the edge of a future uncertain, where every allegiance could mean the difference between ruin and redemption. The court awaited her next move, and Anne Marwood was ready to step into the light once more, no matter the cost. But in the silence, a whisper of footsteps echoed, a reminder that in the game of crowns and blades, no trust was ever absolute, and no heart truly safe. The fragile peace was but the calm before the storm, and Anne knew the ties that bound her would soon be tested beyond measure. The chamber was heavy with the scent of burning wax and old timber, the flickering candlelight casting restless shadows that danced upon the tapestries adorning the walls. Anne Marwood sat silently by the narrow window, the cold tendrils of the evening air slipping through the cracks and brushing her cheek, a stark reminder of the chill that had settled deep within her heart. Outside, the murmurs of the court had faded into the night, leaving only the distant call of a nightingale and the faint rustle of leaves stirring in the garden. But within Anne, a tempest raged, a storm of doubt, exhaustion, and the unyielding weight of duty. Only days before, the dagger she had so carefully concealed had nearly spelled ruin for the Queen she so fiercely loved. The betrayal had cut deeper than any blade, slicing through her trust and leaving raw wounds in the fragile web of alliances she had so painstakingly woven. Yet, here she was, alone with her thoughts, the burden of her secret pressing heavily against her chest. Her fingers absently traced the delicate embroidery along the window sill, seeking solace in the familiar textures. But her mind was a maelstrom of memories, whispered warnings, stolen glances, the cold eyes of Lord Edmund Grey. and the fleeting warmth of Queen Elizabeth's rare moments of kindness. Each recollection was both a balm and a torment. A soft knock interrupted her reverie. Anne turned to see Lady Margaret Seymour enter, her silver-streaked hair catching the candlelight like threads of moonbeam. The elder woman's piercing eyes held a mixture of concern and something else, a steadfast reassurance that had comforted Anne more times than she could count. "Anne," Lady Margaret said softly, closing the door behind her, "the Queen wishes to see you. Now?" The summons stirred a knot of apprehension, but Anne rose, steadying herself. The corridors seemed to stretch endlessly as she made her way to the Queen's private chambers, each step echoing the pounding of her heart. Entering, Anne found Elizabeth seated beneath the grand portrait of Henry VI, her fiery hair a halo in the dim light. The Queen's gaze was sharp, yet beneath it lay a rare softness reserved for those she trusted implicitly. "You carry a weight far heavier than most, Anne," Elizabeth began, her voice low but resolute. "This court is a web of shadows where loyalty is tested and sacrifice demanded. Yet you have proven yourself steadfast." Anne's breath caught, the Queen's words a balm to her weary soul. "I fear my inexperience has endangered you," Anne whispered, voice trembling. Elizabeth reached out, placing a slender hand over Anne's. "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. You have that courage and more. Remember, the crown depends not only on strength, but on those who bear its burdens in silence." The Queen's affirmation ignited a flicker of hope within Anne, a reminder that her sacrifices were not in vain. Later, in the quiet courtyard, Lady Margaret met with Sir Thomas Wycliffe. The two exchanged grave words beneath the cold gaze of the stars, their conversation laced with worry for Anne and the unsettled court. "She carries more than most realize," Lady Margaret murmured, glancing toward the chamber windows. "Her heart is heavy, but her spirit remains unbroken." Sir Thomas nodded, his jaw set in determination. "We must be ready. The threats have not vanished, only shifted." Back in her chamber, Anne sat alone, the hidden dagger resting against her palm beneath the folds of her gown. Its cold metal was a stark reminder of both danger and duty. Memories of recent days surged forth, the close calls, the betrayals, the whispered promises. Her fingers trembled as she traced the intricate hilt, a symbol of the peril entwined with her loyalty. Yet beneath the fear lay a growing resolve, a fierce determination to protect the Queen and the fragile peace they so desperately clung to. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, Anne rose, her heart steadied by the Queen's faith and her own burgeoning strength. The road ahead promised no respite, but she would face it unflinchingly, for the crown, for the realm, and for the future yet unwritten. Outside, the court stirred once more, its whispers and shadows awaiting the next move in a game where trust was scarce and courage the rarest treasure of all. The heavy oak doors of the royal council chamber creaked open, and Anne Marwood stepped inside. Her heart pounding beneath the composed exterior she had cultivated since her arrival at court. The air was thick with the mingled scents of burning tallow and polished wood, an atmosphere steeped in centuries of whispered secrets and unspoken threats. All eyes turned toward her, a lady-in-waiting whose presence here was as unexpected as the courage that had driven her forward. For weeks, Anne had been a shadow among shadows, piecing together scraps of overheard conversations, furtive glances, and half-hidden documents. The dagger had been the catalyst, but the web of intrigue stretched far wider than she had imagined, tangling noble houses, foreign emissaries, and even trusted members of the Queen's inner circle. Now, at this pivotal moment, she would lay bare the truths that many wished to keep buried. Her voice, steady and clear, carried across the assembled courtiers. "My lords and ladies, the threats to Her Majesty's safety do not slumber with the night. We stand on a precipice, and those who would see our Queen fall are closer than we dare admit. Yet, with knowledge and resolve, we can turn the tide." A murmur rippled through the chamber, eyes narrowed, some skeptical, others wary, but all attentive. Anne's gaze met that of Lord Cecil, his expression unreadable yet betraying the slightest flicker of approval. Beside him, Lady Margaret Seymour's piercing eyes shone with quiet pride, a silent affirmation of Anna's growing influence. The council debated fiercely, voices rising and falling like the tides. Anne presented evidence letters, coded messages, testimonies she had secured through discreet channels. Each revelation was a blow to the conspirators and a balm to those loyal to the crown. Among the murmurs, a new current swelled hope. Outside, Sir Thomas Wycliffe stood watchful near the chamber's grand windows, the sunlight glinting off his polished breastplate. His broad shoulders tensed as he caught sight of a figure moving too deliberately among the courtiers, a reminder that danger was never far, even in moments of triumph. As the meeting drew to a close, Queen Elizabeth herself entered, her fiery hair like a flame that seemed to ignite the very air. She regarded Anne with a mixture of gratitude and a sober recognition of the peril that still lurked beneath the court's glittering surface. "Lady Marwood," she said, her voice both regal and warm, "your bravery honors us all. We shall need your keen mind and steadfast heart in the days to come." Anne bowed deeply, a surge of fierce loyalty swelling within her. The flame of courage that had flickered uncertainly within her since her arrival now burned brightly, illuminating a path through the court's tangled shadows. Yet she knew the journey was far from over. Each ally gained was a potential enemy made, and the blade of betrayal remained ever poised. Later, in the quiet sanctuary of the Queen's chambers, Lady Margaret placed a steadying hand on Anne's shoulder. "You have become a beacon in these troubled times," she whispered. "But remember, even the brightest flame must guard against the winds that seek to extinguish it." Anne nodded, her gaze steady. "Then I shall be relentless, for the crown and for those who believe in its light." Outside, the court buzzed with renewed energy, but beneath the surface, shadows still stirred. The game of power was never truly won, only momentarily held. And Anne Marwood was determined to hold it for as long as fate would allow. As the flickering candlelight danced upon the chamber walls, the young lady in waiting's thoughts turned to the coming days. The flame of courage she had kindled tonight would be tested again and again. But with each trial, she would grow stronger, a steadfast guardian in the heart of the Tudor court. And so, as the night deepened and the court settled into uneasy peace, Anne's resolve burned ever brighter, lighting the way through the darkness that still threatened to consume them all. The flame of courage was not just a metaphor, but a living, breathing force within Anne. It propelled her through the labyrinthine corridors, past painted portraits of monarchs long gone, and into the chambers where secrets whispered like ghosts. Each step was measured, yet swift, the weight of the crown's survival a constant anchor. Her mind replayed the council's heated moments. The sharp words exchanged, the piercing glances, the subtle shifts in allegiance. It was a dance she was learning to lead rather than follow. When Lord Grey's name surfaced once more, the room had tensed, but Anne's steadfast presentation had quelled the rising tide of panic. Later that evening, as moonlight filtered through the stained glass windows, Anne found herself alone in the rose garden, the scent of night blooms mingling with the crisp air. Sir Thomas approached silently, his presence a comforting shadow. "You carried the chamber today with the poise of a seasoned courtier," he murmured, voice low but earnest. "I am proud to stand with you." She smiled faintly, the exhaustion beneath her calm evident only to those closest. "There is still much to do. The blade has not been sheathed, and the enemies of the crown are patient." "Then we shall be patient too," he replied, eyes scanning the darkened hedges, "but always ready." Their shared resolve was a quiet rebellion against the dangers encircling them, a promise that courage would be their shield and hope their sword. Inside, Lady Margaret prepared a cup of spiced wine, her hands steady despite the turmoil within. When Anne returned, the elder woman's eyes gleamed with respect and a hint of something softer hope. "You have lit a fire that cannot be easily quenched," she said softly. But remember, even fire can burn too bright and consume what it seeks to protect. Anne accepted the cup, her fingers brushing Lady Margaret's. Then I shall temper it with wisdom and watchfulness. For the Queen, for the realm, for all who believe in a future brighter than this darkness. The night stretched on, filled with whispered plans, and the quiet resolve of those who dared to stand against the gathering storm. Anne Marwood, once a cautious observer, had become a flame in the heart of the Tudor court, a beacon of hope, courage, and unyielding loyalty. And as dawn approached, promising new challenges and dangers, that flame would burn ever brighter, lighting the way through the shadows that sought to claim the crown. The court's corridors echoed with footsteps and hushed conversations as the days following the council meeting unfolded. Anne found herself courted by whispers of admiration and veiled threats alike. Her name was spoken with newfound respect, yet the eyes that lingered too long betrayed suspicion and envy. In the great hall, tapestries depicting England's storied past seemed to watch silently as Anne navigated the delicate balance of favor and caution. Queen Elizabeth's gaze often found her among the crowd, a silent acknowledgement passing between sovereign and subject. Amid the swirl of court life, Anne's thoughts remained anchored to the lessons Lady Margaret had imparted and the steadfast watchfulness embodied by Sir Thomas. Together, they formed a fragile triad of strength, each playing their part in the ongoing struggle to protect the realm from the unseen blades that lurked in every shadow. Yet with each victory, the stakes rose. The flame of courage that Anne carried was both a beacon and a target, and the court's labyrinthine intrigues promised that peace was but a fleeting illusion. As a new day dawned over the Tudor palace, Anne Marwood steeled herself for the trials yet to come, her heart aflame with fierce loyalty and unyielding resolve. For in a world where power was as sharp and dangerous as any blade, courage was the greatest weapon of all. The heavy oak door of the gallery creaked softly as Anne Marwood stepped inside, the warmth of the candlelight casting a trembling glow upon the ancient tapestries that lined the walls. The flickering flames danced like restless spirits, their shadows stretching long and thin across the polished floor. Here, in this quiet sanctuary away from the court's endless noise and suspicion, Anne allowed herself a rare moment of solitude. Her fingers traced the intricate embroidery of the fabric, worn smooth by centuries of whispered secrets and hushed betrayals. The weight of the dagger she had once hidden felt distant now, yet its shadow lingered in her thoughts like a persistent chill. She had survived the storm, yes, but the calm that followed was fragile, a delicate glass waiting to shatter. The court was not a place of safety. It was a labyrinth of shifting alliances and veiled threats where power was the only currency that mattered. Anne's heart beat with a mixture of exhaustion and fierce determination. She had learned much about trust and deception, about courage and sacrifice. The faces of those she had lost or betrayed flickered in her memory, each a reminder of the price paid for loyalty. A soft rustle of silk and the faint scent of myrrh drew her attention. Queen Elizabeth herself entered the gallery, her presence commanding even in the low light. The Queen's fiery red hair was pulled back in an elegant knot, strands of pearls woven through it like tiny stars. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, met Anne's with a depth that spoke of both gratitude and recognition. "Lady Marwood," Elizabeth said, her voice steady but warm. "You have served me well. Your courage has not gone unnoticed." Anne bowed deeply, a flush rising to her cheeks. "It is my honor, Your Majesty." The Queen stepped closer, extending a steady hand. Anne hesitated for a heartbeat before taking it, the gesture a rare and powerful symbol of trust. In that moment, the gulf between sovereign and subject seemed to narrow, united by a shared understanding of the burdens they bore. "The realm owes you a debt," Elizabeth murmured, "but so too does it demand vigilance. The blade may be sheathed for now, but the shadows never truly recede." Anne nodded, the weight of the crown's survival pressing anew upon her shoulders. It was a mantle she was now ready to bear. Elsewhere in the great hall, Lady Margaret Seymour and Sir Thomas Wycliffe exchanged a glance thick with unspoken meaning. The tension that had once gripped them had softened, replaced by a cautious hope as they observed Anne's steady ascent within the court's ranks. Margaret's silver-streaked hair caught the torchlight, her piercing eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and wariness. Thomas's broad shoulders relaxed slightly, though the hardened set of his jaw remained a testament to battles fought and those yet to come. "She will need all our support," Margaret said quietly. "And all our vigilance," Thomas replied, his voice low but firm. The palace gardens beckoned as twilight deepened, their fragrant blooms a stark contrast to the palace's cold stone walls. Anne walked slowly along the gravel path, the scent of roses sweet and heavy in the cooling air. The sky blushed with the last light of day, hues of amber and violet melting into night. It was a moment of fragile peace, a fleeting reminder that even in a world shaped by betrayal and ambition, beauty endured. Her thoughts turned inward, grappling with the emotional scars that no court intrigue could erase. The sacrifices made, the trust broken and rebuilt, the faces of friends and foes alike all woven into the tapestry of her life. The legacy of the blade was not just in the threat it posed, but in the courage it had inspired. Anne's journey was far from over. The court awaited her with its endless dance of power and peril. But now she walked with a steadier step, eyes open to the dangers ahead, heart bound by an unwavering loyalty to the Queen and the fragile hope of a realm held together by the strength of those who dared to stand in the shadows. As the stars began to emerge in the night sky, Anne Marwood made a silent vow to guard the crown not only with blade and wit, but with the resilience of spirit that true allegiance demanded. The legacy of the dagger was hers to carry, a symbol not just of threat, but of the fierce light that could illuminate even the darkest of courts. And so, beneath the vast canopy of stars, the story of Anne Marwood, protector of a queen and guardian of a kingdom's future, found its quiet, resolute closer beginning as much as an end in the ever-turning wheel of power and sacrifice.